All right, we got there.
We
For
did.
anyone that is listening, we have just spent about an hour and a half with some technical difficulties, but we made it. So, welcome to Little Life Big Loss. This will be episode 5 of our little podcast series. And I'm so excited and so honored to have a beautiful guest on here today who I actually don't know very well at all. And this is what I kind of love about what's happening with the podcast is that people are reaching out saying, I have a friend who has a story, or I have a friend who'd like to share their story. And so I just asked Ashlee last week just a tiny snippet, and I didn't want to ask too many questions because what I really wanted was to be able to organically ask those questions on the podcast. I'm super, super intrigued by your story, and I can't wait to hear about it. So I obviously can't introduce you too much because I don't know much about you, but I know you have an amazing story. And so I'm going to start with just asking a couple of questions. And I guess my first question is um, who were you before you became Milo's mum? So
So
let's
mine,
tell us a little bit about yourself.
okay. My name is Ashlee. Um, Before becoming Milo's mum, I was a sister, a girlfriend, a fiance, and a wife. Um, I am the second youngest of 5 kids, and family has always been such a strong presence in my life. My family are very close. We kind of do everything together, and my family aren't just my family, they're my best friends as well. Um, I had Milo quite
That's so
young.
nice.
So I hadn't lived much, to be honest, but my life kind of revolved around my partner, Kyle, um, my
Yeah.
husband, and Milo's dad. And yeah,
Yeah.
that was me. I just wanted to be a mum so much. I am quite an anxious person, um, but that's been something that I've kind of dealt with throughout my life on and off. But yeah, that was me, just a girl who just couldn't wait to start my own family um, and have the family that I have, but of my own, and to create what my mum and dad created for me, to continue that on and
Yeah.
have my own family.
That's so nice. So, how long were you and Kyle together before you started trying to conceive?
We were together. We met at high school. We were together for about 5 years before we
Yeah.
got married and moved into our home. So we were very fortunate enough to live in my parents' granny flat and save up for our first home, which we built
Yeah.
together and moved into. We got married in the same month. Um, that we moved into our home, so that was quite quite busy that
Nice. And this was on the
previous year.
Central Coast?
It was on the Central Coast, New South Wales, and um, yeah, we got married, we moved into our home, and once we were married, I felt like we had the foundations to start a family. So we just kind of thought, you know, if we fall pregnant, we fall pregnant, and yeah, and we were really fortunate. It only took us 4 short months. At the time, it felt like forever. But yeah, looking back
Mm-hmm.
now, it was so we were very blessed, and yeah, we conceived Milo within 4 months after we got married.
Yeah, that's so nice. And so, how old were you guys then? You
Um,
said you were
I
quite young.
was I was 21 when I got married, and Kyle's a year older than me, so he would have been 22. Yeah, so we're about 21 and 22 when we conceived Milo, and then she was born a year later, so I was
Yeah.
about 22.
Yeah. Okay. So tell us about Milo. What was your
uh,
pregnancy like? Was there a time during your pregnancy that you thought something was wrong, or that you knew something was wrong, or what? How was your pregnancy up until that point?
so my pregnancy, looking back on it, was quite good. I remember that first 12 weeks being so nervous, and, there's so much emphasis on that first 12 weeks, not to announce it to anyone or not share it with anyone because that's the time where you could unfortunately miscarry. So I remember so vividly during that um, 12 weeks, I would sing to my stomach, "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. Please don't take my sunshine away."
Oh,
Being an anxious person, that was something I was really nervous about, was miscarrying. Um, and so I would sing that song and it would make me feel a little bit better, I guess. And then after the 12 weeks, I felt like I was in the all clear. And we obviously started to tell people. Everybody was
yeah.
finding out what they were having, and I wanted to be a bit different from everyone else. So we decided not to find out the gender of our baby, which was really hard because I really wanted a little girl. I would have loved the baby no matter what, but I
Mm-hmm.
just really wanted a daughter. Um, and it was
Yeah.
really hard going to the shops and seeing all the boys' items and girls' items and not knowing what I am about to be buying for. So I'd always just look at the
Mm-hmm.
girl stuff anyway, and and just, yeah, I couldn't wait to birth the baby so I could find out, so I could go back to the shops and buy all those beautiful things I saw.
Uh-huh. You did so good. I was obsessed. I was like straight away as soon as we found out everything was pink.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And so
um,
you didn't find out?
no, we didn't find out up until she was born. Um, Everything was tracking along really well. I didn't have any complications. I would obviously get a little bit nervous here and there. I was always still a little bit, I was cautious about everything I ate. Everything they told me to do, I did. Everything they told me not to do, I didn't do. Um, I just really wanted to, you know, create the best environment for my growing baby. Um, I was currently working at the time, so I was working full time and at a school, in the office where I currently still am at the moment. Um, and I wanted to work right up until I had the baby because I just wanted to use majority of my maternity leave to spend at home with my baby, and my husband. So
Mm-hmm.
I worked right up until I had her. It was about I was around 32 weeks and I had to go for a growth scan. And that's where things sort of started to go a bit downhill for me and my pregnancy. Um, I remember I was at the gestational age to be able to have the 3D ultrasound, which I was so excited for.
Oh, yeah.
So we paid a little bit extra money and we went and had that scan, which was so nice to see the baby. And I remember just thinking she looked so much like my husband. Her profile was just him to a T. So then I started thinking I might be having a boy. Um, and then we had our appointment at the hospital to go through our baby's growth results. And I had gone to that appointment by myself, um, and we were just having our maternity appointments at the local hospital that was close by to us. Um, it was closer to our work and closer to our home, so it just seemed like the more suitable option. But because it's more of a smaller hospital, we were birthing the baby at the bigger hospital, that was a little bit further away, probably about 45 minutes away. But they worked hand in hand and they knew what was happening. That was the plan. So I went in, to my appointment at the hospital, and I remember waiting for so long. I was sitting in the waiting room and I was so hungry. And I remember texting my mum and I said, "I'm so hungry. This isn't good for the baby. I need to be eating something." And she suggested going to the vending machine and buying something. And I said, "No, mum." I said, "No, knowing my luck, I'll walk to the vending machine or waddle at that stage, as in by the time I get back, they would have called me and then I'll miss my appointment." And I was like, "I've waited this long. I'll continue to wait a little longer." Um, and
Yeah.
so I was a little bit nervous, a little bit anxious. And then they finally called me in, and I went into the room, and there was a doctor, with a bit of an accent. I'd never met him before. I was kind of more having just midwife appointments because I wasn't, it was going really well. There was a trainee doctor in there at the time, and it's so funny that the things that you remember and the things that you don't remember. But I just remember walking into the room, and I felt a little bit nervous with the two sort of male medical professionals, I guess, in the room. And he asked me if it was okay if the student
Mm.
was present, and I was fine with that. And we got chatting, and I started to feel more comfortable. And I laid up on the bed, and the student doctor, he did all the routine checks, like measured my stomach, listened to the baby's heartbeat, checked my blood pressure, and that sort of thing. And then I went and had a sit down, and I spoke to the doctor, and he said that um, I can't remember word for word, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, but he pretty much told me, and this is how I understood what came from the conversation, was that my baby was small for gestational age. Otherwise, everything was looking well. He said, looking at you, you're quite small. He said it could just be because you're small. He said, or it could be that the placenta's, not doing its job. Therefore, the baby's not getting all of the nutrients it needs to continue to grow. He said that a possibility of an induction was on the cards. And that kind of got me excited because I thought, oh, yes, I'm so close, and that'll bring it even closer. And
Earlier.
yeah, I can have the baby earlier. So I was slightly concerned, but I wasn't too worried. Admittedly, I was so far along in my pregnancy. My belly was so big. I didn't,
Of
I-
course.
it never crossed my mind that something could go terribly wrong. And I was seeing them, and I was getting scans, and we were doing stuff
The
about it.
heartbeat was
So
there, and yeah,
yeah, she
yeah.
was, doing really well. And before we left, he said to me, "Jump up on the bed, and I'll check you again," just because he wanted to double check everything was fine from the student. So I was checked a second time. And then I left, and I went and stood at the reception, and there was no one in administration there. And I waited a little bit longer, and I was quite hungry by this stage. So I was really impatient, and I was hoping that someone would come around. And there was a gentleman behind the desk, and he said somebody would be with me shortly. So I waited a little longer, and the doctor had told me to go have a second scan so we can compare the two and see how the baby's growing. Um, and he said, book an appointment to come and see me, and then we can go through the results. So I waited at the desk for a little longer, and then a midwife came around the corner, and she took me into a room next to the desk, and she said, "Oh, we'll book your appointment." So she jumped on the computer, and she booked me in, and we wrote it on my little card that the hospital had given me. I was in, I think, the Bluebird clinic. Um, and
Mm.
it was written on there, and I went home, and I booked in the scan. I had to go to the same place. He suggested to go to the same place because he said that all of the everywhere's a bit different, and they scan differently. He said, so if you go to the same place, it's more likely to be
Okay.
done similar to the first one. So we'll have a better reading, I guess. So then I had booked the scan. I'd had a second scan, and we drove down there and had that done. And then my husband Kyle and I went to the appointment together because I assumed it would be an important appointment, and there would be things that we both kind of need to know. And I was also still excited about this whole induction that could potentially be on the cards,
Mm.
moving everything a little bit closer. So I was excited. It was so busy, the hospital, it was hard to get a park, and he dropped me off, and I walked in, and I got to the reception while he was waiting for while he was parking the car. And I remember walking to the receptionist, and I said to her, Ashlee Lanzini, I'm here for my appointment. And she was trying to check me in, or do her part. And she couldn't find my appointment for the day, or she couldn't find my name on the list of appointments. And I second guessed myself because pregnancy brain and everything else,
Yeah.
it was getting to that point. So I thought, oh goodness, I hope I've got it right. And we'd just taken time off work to come to this appointment. So I had a quick look on my sheet, and where the lady had wrote it in, it was all correct. I had the right time, the right date, and I showed them that. And because of that, she went to get another lady, and then they both came over, and by that time, Kyle had parked the car, and he'd walked in, and I said, "Oh, something's going on. They've missed my appointment, or they've they don't have it on file or record, whatever it may be." And the lady came over, and she asked me. She said, "Are you high risk?" And I said, "No, I'm not." I didn't want to say I was high risk because no one had told me I am, and I definitely didn't want to take a
Yeah.
place of somebody that was high risk, and who I felt needed it more than I did. So I said no,
Mm.
and she said, "Look," she said, we don't have you down today. She said, all of our doctors are too busy. We can't see you. And I started to get a little bit upset. I was, oh, again, I was so looking forward to this appointment. We'd taken time off work. We'd both gone there.
Mm.
And I think she could see that. So she said, look, I'll try and get you out in with a midwife.
And
And so
how
I
long
was,
was that since the appointment before that was your 32-week one? So how long had it been?
I think it had been a week later that I'd booked it. He wanted there to be a week or two. I think it may have even been 2 weeks. So I was 32 weeks or
Mm.
34. I was about 35 at this stage, I think, because he
Okay.
wanted a little bit of time to see, like, to allow the baby to grow. Um, and
Mm.
so we sat down and she said she'll get a midwife to come and see us. So I remember sitting down, and by that time, I think that my anxiety started to sort of kick in, and we sat there, and I hate confrontation. I hate conflict. I avoid it at all costs. Um, and I'm not very good at saying how I feel and being, I guess, direct. I tend to just let things slide and let it be. Um, and so I was sitting there a little bit upset, and Kyle could tell. And they, this midwife came around the corner who I'd never met before, and she called me into the room, and I started talking to her and trying to explain to her in the best way I could everything that had happened previously, the scans, what the doctor had told me, etc. And she said what the administration team had told me already. She said that, the doctors were too busy, and that is all that I can remember in my head. That was just, they were too busy that day. Um, and I expressed to her some concerns I was having about, the reduced movements. Um, I had asked her a couple of questions, and I remember just feeling like I was a young mum, and I remember feeling stupid, and I remember just, yeah, not feeling like I was in control. I felt like a child again, um, and here I am about to become someone's mum, and I just didn't feel
Mm.
the way a mum should
And did
feel.
they make you like? Do you think that you felt like that in yourself, or do you feel like they made you feel like that by not
Um, I feel like it was a bit
requesting
of
stillborn?
both. I feel like it was me who I am as an individual, but also the way I feel like they were dismissing my concerns and, missed my
Mm.
appointment. I didn't feel. I felt like a number instead of a patient or a person. Um, I didn't feel very important at all, and my baby definitely didn't feel important whatsoever. The
Mm.
midwife said she would go and talk to the doctor really quickly, and so she left the room. And I remember staring at Kyle, and I wasn't very impressed, and I didn't want to show her that. So when she left the room, I was comfortable enough to, sigh or say to him, how I was feeling. Um, and then she
Yeah.
came back and she's like, look, I've spoken to the doctor and he wants you to go for a second scan so we can compare the two. And she was kind of saying what the previous doctor had said to me in my last appointment. And so I explained that to her, and I told her I've already had two scans. And to her surprise, she seemed shocked. So um, the more I think about it, I wonder what she sort of told him, because if she didn't have two scans and he didn't have two scans to look at, I don't know where
Yeah. Where
his.
were your scans?
Yeah. So then she was kind of like,
Investigation.
oh, yeah, and she was like, oh, um, you've had two scans. She said, oh, I'll just go back and talk to the doctor. So I felt like no one was really understanding what was going on, and then she left again. And I remember this time I felt even more anxious, and I remember looking at Kyle, and I just I felt my heart racing, and I just did not feel nice. And she came back and she's like, look, yes, it's all good. He wants you to have a third scan. And at this point, I was kind of a little bit ticked off because I was like,
What?
I've driven all the way down,
Mm.
to Gosford twice now to have a scan. And now I've got to go back for a third time. Um, and so I wasn't really
Mm.
happy about that. But obviously, that's what she said. And I explained to her about the movements decreasing. She said, look, it's just normal. She said that, the baby's getting bigger, they're running out of room, the movements do tend to,
Oof.
and
Mm.
which I believed. Um, and
Mm.
then I remember leaving there, and she said, and then she booked us in for another appointment, and she said, "Look, we're not gonna miss this appointment. I'll make sure it's in there." And tried to reassure me that next
Mm.
time I show up for my appointment, I'll be able to have my appointment. Anyway, so we left, and I remember
But
going home.
I will just add there. I will just add there because I remember when I had reduced movements and I put a post up on Instagram saying that if you have a lot of movements and then lack of movements, or lack of movements then a lot, then it's a reason to call for help type thing. And my
Yeah,
obstetrician said that movements should never decrease. He said that increased movement is not bad, but decreased is definitely bad. And he said
yeah,
it's such a myth that as the baby
yeah,
gets bigger, there's less room and you shouldn't feel them. So I just want to add that bit in because it is
yeah. Oh,
a massive misconception that people think, you know,
yeah,
that because a
definitely.
newborn baby can't move, yeah.
You definitely should be able to, and that's something that since having Milo, I've definitely looked into a lot more. And yeah, reduced movements is definitely not not something that you should let slide. It's definitely something
Mm.
that should raise quite big concerns. I have heard that the
And
movements
I was the same as
change,
you,
but
and I'm
yeah, no,
yeah.
sorry. I've
It's like
heard that the
you're saying
movements
that you're
change because they
21
get
and
bigger.
you felt so sorry. We have the biggest dog ever. So funny. So yeah, I think so the hard thing for me is I didn't have much movement with Millie at all, and I
Oh,
guess I felt really silly as well now that everything's happened with Millie because I was told, it's your first pregnancy, you don't know what it's supposed to
yeah,
feel like. I had an anterior placenta, um, and so I'm 37, I'm not 21, and I still felt silly. So I think it's
yeah,
like sometimes not that the medical staff treated me like an idiot, but I was just like, well, I guess I don't know what it's supposed to feel like. And then people do try to make you feel better by saying, oh, my baby didn't move much either. But like, I legitimately did not feel really much at all. I knew that there was I used to say, there's something in there. I could feel it's not human, but I couldn't feel the
yeah,
kicks and the punches. So I didn't know. I went in 3 times for reduced movement as well. And I guess every time they
yeah,
monitored her, they'd be like, yeah, like she's moving enough. So I
yeah,
definitely feel you in that whole, and I'm a very anxious person as well. It's like, but then we don't know to fight for anything more because it is our first pregnancy, and I guess even people that probably have multiple pregnancies may or may not know to fight for those things. But I certainly didn't know in my first pregnancy what
yeah,
was
that's right.
normal and what was not.
And I think that's the saddest
Yeah.
part. I think because it's your first pregnancy, um, you don't know and you have nothing to compare it to. And you're just learning all of these things for the first time, and you're trying to remember everything and you're trying to create this beautiful environment to grow your baby. And, with all of the emotions that come with being pregnant, it's such a big
Mm.
time, and it's such a stressful time, and it's such a beautiful time all in one. So, it is really hard, and I definitely felt very silly, a lot of the time.
Mm.
Um,
And
s-
I was the same as you with the whole what was I going to say? Silly. Oh yeah, that I never, once I got past that 12 weeks, never did I like 12 weeks, 20 weeks, 30 weeks. Like I remember getting wheeled into the theater at 39 weeks to have Millie plan Caesar, and I was like, we made it. Like to the
yeah,
obstetrician. Never
yeah,
did I think that something could go wrong
yeah,
once we'd reached there. Like I guess I maybe if I'd ever heard of baby loss, I thought people always knew that something was wrong, or I
that's
don't
right.
know, but
Or
I
they
was
knew
assuming
sort of
because
during the
like I'd gotten
pregnancy.
past all those safe points. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, and I use the word funny, but I always use that word when I'm talking about Milo, and
Mm,
I don't mean it in the way that it's meant to be used. I just can't think of
mm,
any other word, and I explain that every time I use the word. Um, but
yeah.
it, it's funny you say that because I was at work, the last week of work before having Milo, and a friend and a colleague of mine. There was two other staff members, teaching staff, and they were having their second children, and they ironically had their babies days before Milo was born, and they had them in the same hospital, um, in the rooms next to each other, pretty much on the same day. within hours apart. And it was the three of us that were having babies. And my friend and colleague, she said, "Oh, Ashlee, they're being born, like you're next." And it was just so exciting because Milo was due the month after, but it was kind of like, you tick things off throughout the pregnancy and you just keep getting closer to that, you know, finish line where, it's just meant to be beautiful. And that's definitely the vision I had in my mind. Um, and yeah, so we ended up leaving the hospital
Absolutely.
um, quite, con- confused is probably the best word I can use for it. We were so confused. I didn't know what was happening. I was just told have another scan. So I went home and I remember booking the scan in, and I remember being so upset. I was folding tea towels actually because I think I just needed to do something, mm, you know, mm, small just to keep me busy. And I remember
Yeah.
so vividly. This is another. It's just those things that you do just remember. And I remember just crying. I was so overwhelmed, and I rang my mum. And I was telling her about it. She's had 5 kids. Who better not to ask? Um, and I
Mm-hmm.
said to her pretty much what they told me. And she said, "Ashlee, that doesn't sound right." She said, "I would be getting a second opinion." She said, "Why don't you call our local GP?" And my reaction to her was, what's the point? He's a GP, which I respect him in his profession, but I'm talking to midwives and doctors who look after pregnant women. Who better not to get advice from, or
Mm.
to and I said to my mum, like,
Put
what
your
more are they
trust
going
in.
to say? Yeah, these are the people looking after me. I'm trusting them with
Mm.
my baby and my baby's life, and and I guess mine to some extent. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so she we'd left that conversation, and I just remember feeling, yeah, so overwhelmed, so confused, so sad. And I'd booked the appointment in, I rang them. And then it was Friday, I finished work. And I remember sitting at work. This is another remember thing. And I felt this massive kick up under my ribs, and it made my blood run cold, and it was almost like I heard our bones touching. And it was just such a big strong kick. And to be honest, that was the last time I felt her. um, yeah, which is I think that's why I just will always remember it. um, and then that was Friday. And then the weekend, obviously, was next. And
Mm.
my husband played rugby union, so he would usually go all day. So he wasn't there when I woke up, and he was off playing sport. And I kind of didn't want to be by myself. I'm so used to having family around, that I would often go to my parents' house where my sister was living in the granny flat at the time. And my parents were away in foster. They had gone on a holiday with one of my brothers and his family. And I remember my sister was cleaning the flat, so I went and sat with her all day, and I just watched her clean. And we were just chatting about everything and anything. And I remember we ordered some hot chips for lunch, and I was sitting there eating them, and I looked down at my feet, and my feet were swollen. And and I was like, "Oh, that's a bit strange. That's a new thing for me. I haven't felt that yet, but I guess it's part and parcel of being pregnant." I was really
Mm.
fortunate enough to not experience many negatives. I didn't have much morning sickness either, which was nice. And then we,
Yeah.
yeah, and so I was talking to my sister, and I couldn't feel much movement, but I was reassured because the midwife had told me, it's normal. The baby's running out of room. I'm so
Mm.
tiny that I just
Oh my
had
gosh.
this huge belly that was so tight. Um, but that was actually another weird thing that I did notice. My stomach wasn't as tight um, as it had previously been. And so I went home. I kind of didn't think again. I was so complacent and naive looking back. But again, I just trusted that I was doing the best for my baby. And um, I guess as a mum and as a pregnant woman, there's only so much you can do that's in your control. And so I went home and I had a shower, and Kyle had got back home, and we ordered pizza for dinner, and we sat in bed. And I remember watching TV, and in bed, at nighttime was usually the time I would feel her most, because I would be laying still and I'd have time to focus
Mm.
on her. And there was just no movement. And when I laid on my back, my tummy felt a bit, a bit not as firm and as round as it normally felt. And I expressed my concerns to Kyle, and we both sort of worried, but not too much. And we rang the hospital because we thought we'd better do the right thing anyway. They suggested that we go down to the hospital that we were going to birth at. Um, and just get checked. So I remember getting changed out of our pajamas, and it's so weird. I can remember the exact clothes I wore. I can remember putting my sneakers on. I then we jumped in the car and we drove down, and it's about a from where we were living. It's um, maybe like a 50-minute drive. It was late at night. I think it was around 11:30, so it took us quicker to get there. And I remember on our drive there was some kids
Yeah.
on the side of the road, and one sort of jumped out in front of our car as a joke. And I remember saying to Kyle, I turned and I said, "My child would never be doing that. My child would never be. This baby won't be running around the streets at night." And we were both sort of reassuring each other on the drive down that everything would be okay. And my anxiety was definitely set in. But again, I've been such a lucky person in life. I grew up in a small home, but it was full of love and laughter. And I've got my mum and dad, and I've got my siblings, and I always say bad things just didn't happen to me, and I was very lucky. So I didn't think anything bad was going to happen, if I'm honest. And we parked the car and we drove in and we went into the birthing suite. And oh my goodness, I remember just feeling so excited. I all of a sudden wasn't nervous. I was in this. I was in the environment that I would be birthing my child in soon, and meeting her or him, and I was just so excited. And they took us into a room. It was quiet because it was late at night. And I remember we walked into this birthing suite and my face just lit up. And I said to Kyle, I said, "Oh my God, this is where we'll be having the baby." And there was a little area where they put the baby when they're born. And I said, "That's where the baby will go," acting like I knew everything, but I really didn't. I was just guessing. And I was just excited to share that with him. They had to take a urine sample. So I went off and did that in the bathroom. And then I came back out and I remember sitting on the bed, and I was still so excited. I don't know why I wasn't nervous, but I was more excited than anything. A little bit nervous, I guess, but the excitement was definitely larger. And this midwife came in. I don't know her name. I can remember every detail of what she looked like, but I can't remember her name. And she came in and she got the Doppler machine and she was, trying to listen to the heartbeat. And she struggled to find it. And that was probably where I started to get nervous. But again, I was still so naive. I was young. I had this big belly. There was a fully grown baby almost inside of me, and I was it. I was going to have this baby, and I was going to go home with
Yeah.
it. Um,
Yeah.
and she said, she said, I'm just having a little difficulty. She said, not to worry. She said, "I'm just going to get a doctor." Anyway, this gentleman walked in, and it was the doctor that I originally saw in the hospital for my first appointment to discuss my growth scan. And I turned to Kyle, who would, and I said, "This is the doctor." I said, and I asked him, I said, "Do you remember me?" I said, "My baby's growing a bit small." I said, "I saw you, told me to have a scan." And he couldn't really remember me, which I thought, that's fair. He deals with so many patients. Um, but he kind of was dismissing me as well, like as if he knew there was something wrong, and he couldn't really make eye contact with me. And I must admit, his body language scared me a little bit. And I just remember saying to Cole, "This is the doctor, like, this is the guy that I saw." And he brought an ultrasound machine over. I assume it had, like, it wasn't just the Doppler with the sound, it was an actual screen. And he he brought the machine over to us, and he put the ultrasound on my stomach, and it just took a while and it just felt like forever. And I remember him just looking up at me, and he just said, "I'm sorry." And I just couldn't really understand what he was saying. One word, and I still couldn't understand it. And I remember just saying, "What are you saying?" And he just kept saying, "I'm sorry." And I just kept saying, "What are you saying?" Um, it was kind of like I didn't want to believe it, and I just wanted him to say something else. Um, and then he
Yeah.
put the machine back on, or whatever it is on my stomach, and he turned the screen so I could see, and he pointed to her heartbeat, and he said to me that this is your baby's heartbeat, and it stopped beating. And I think I blanked out for a while, to be honest. And Kyle and I kind of just started crying. Kyle started punching the door to the bathroom, and I remember apologizing on his behalf because that's the kind of person I am.
Yeah.
And with everything else going on, I was so worried about everybody else. But yeah, I remember just not knowing what was going on, and then it was really weird, and I feel sick kind of saying this. Um, but I was sad, but I was more sad for myself, and that sounds so selfish. Um, but if I'm being honest, I just was supposed to be having a baby, and I was supposed to be bringing a
Yeah.
baby home, and I had everyone I knew I was having a baby, and my baby's room was set up, and I had clothes, and I
Yeah.
had maternity leave coming up. And I remember just feeling really sad, but it was more, and I remember saying to him, I said, "When can I have another baby?" And I can't believe I said that, but that's what I said to him.
Yeah.
And I just said, "When can I have another baby?" And he said, I can't really remember. I think he said, whenever you want, but we need to, you know, there's other stuff we need to do. And then I remember my initial reaction was, when can I have another baby? And then I looked down, and I just looked at my big pregnant stomach, and I just got so scared. And I just asked if I was okay, and if there was and what was going to happen to me. I didn't know how I was supposed to
Yeah.
get this baby out. Um, and I remember just asking him
Mhm.
what's going to happen. Um, and am I going to be okay? Because I was such an anxious person. Death has always been the thing that scares me. So anything, I'm just so scared to die. It's been the source of my anxiety all my life. And he then said to me that I could have the baby now or I could come back. And then all of a sudden he left, and there was an emergency that he had to tend to, and I never saw him again. Um, and then the
Wow.
midwife came in, and she was crying and trying her best to help us. And I just wanted my mum, and I just remember telling Kyle, "Can you just ring mum?" Uh, and I think he did. He rang my mum, and he rang his mum, and he rang my sisters, or I rang them, but I can't remember. They tell me that I rang them. And I just
Yeah.
wanted them with me. And I believe they came. So my two sisters came, my sister's boyfriend, um, and Kyle's mum came, and Kyle's aunties came to the hospital. They all weren't allowed into the room. I remember his mum coming in, I think, first, and then she left, and then my sisters came in, and we were all just crying. There wasn't really much to
What
say.
year was this?
This happened back in 2017. So this would have been Saturday, the 25th of March, 2017. And so then the midwife came back in, and she said that I needed to go home to come to terms with what happened and come back in the morning. Um, so we did, and we
Oh.
left. And I remember walking out of that hospital, and I saw my families like sitting there that came, and they just hugged me, and I didn't have much to say. I was just crying, and I walked out of the hospital, and um, we got in my car, and the baby seat was in the back, and my
Oh.
sister drove my car home, and Kyle and I went in the car. Um, and when we got to my house, which was about a 45-minute, again, 50-minute drive home, my parents had actually pulled into my driveway. I don't know how they got home so fast from Foster. Um, but my mum said that my dad nearly killed them on the drive there because he was just rushing to get to me. Um, and I remember seeing them, and I went into my house. I didn't say much to them. I just remember going for a shower. I'm a bit of a germaphobe because I don't want to get sick because I don't want to
Yeah.
die. um,
Yeah.
and so I remember going home, and I just really wanted to shower because I'd been in a gross hospital was what was going through my mind. And
Mm.
I was in my ensuite, and I just remember stripping off, and I was staring at myself in the shower, through the shower to the mirror, and I was just pregnant, but there was no baby, and it was, well, there was, but and death has always scared me, and I had death inside of me, and that was really scary. And I didn't know how I was going to have this baby, so I just had so much going on in my mind. Um, and I remember showering, and then I got into bed, and I struggled to fall asleep, but I ended up sleeping, and I remember waking up, and I swore it was a bad dream, and I thought I had a bad dream, and it's like I had to relive it all over again. And I said to my family, I said, I just want to go back to the hospital. I just want it to be over. And so we drove all the way back to the hospital, and I went into the same area I was in the night before. And my brothers had come, my sisters came again. My dad was there, my mum was there, and they admitted me to a room. Um, and I had to have blood tests done. I remember them taking a blood test out of my arm, and it just lasted so long. I lost the feeling in my arm. And then be I had to walk down to the ultrasound area of the hospital to have an ultrasound done, and that was really disgusting. And I remember just looking away and just wishing that it would be over. I still don't know what the ultrasound was for. I assume they were trying to look where the baby was. And then I went back to the room, and I spent pretty much all day there. And I was greeted by this really lovely midwife whose name was Julie. And I'll never forget her. She was just so beautiful, and she helped me so much. And she finally explained to me what was going to happen to me. And they told me that I was going to be induced and have my baby. Um, so they sent me home again they gave me a tablet which started the induction process apparently, and they also gave me a sleeping tablet. So we left the hospital for a second time, and I couldn't go back to my house because it just reminded me of my old life, I guess. And I felt like I was just living in some sort of nightmare. So we went back to my parents' house, which is the home I grew up in. Um, and I remember sleeping on a mattress in my parents' lounge room, and with my husband and my brother who lived in Sydney who had come down. He was laying on the lounge next to me, and he was holding my hand, and I just remember telling him that I was so scared, and I just didn't know if I could do it. I told him I can't. I said I can't do this. And he said I was the strongest person he ever met and that I could do it. And I ended up going to sleep that night, and we drove down to the hospital on the Monday. Sorry. On the Monday, the 27th of March. And I knew I was going to have this baby. It had just been such a long weekend. And I remember driving to the hospital, and I just looked out the window, and I had driven to that hospital so many times, and I grew up in that area, and everything I drove past was so familiar but so unfamiliar at the same time. And I just felt like I was I can't even explain it. I felt so numb and so scared. I was just so scared, I think. And we drove down to the hospital, and I had to go back into the same birthing suite for the third time. And I was met by the same midwife, Julie. She purposely made sure she was there to help me have Milo. And then I had all my family in the room, and they inserted a tablet into my cervix to help soften it and start the contraction. So I I had that, and not long after I had that, my I think I started getting cramping, and so she said that I think you're starting to go through starting labour, and so she asked all my family to get out of the room, which they did, and they went into a little courtyard, there was a window in my room, and they were on the other side. They couldn't see me, but I could see them.
Okay.
And I had my mum stay, and my husband Kyle, and then my sister Danielle. She's my older sister, and she had had two kids by that stage of her own. And I just really wanted her in there. I don't know why. I didn't want her to leave. Um, and then I went through labour, and I had contractions and everything, you name it. Um, I don't know exactly how long I was in labour for, but it was a while, to the point where I was towards the end and I just couldn't take it anymore. And I asked them if I could have an epidural, but I was too far along to have an epidural, which I'm grateful for. Uh, and then I remember pushing and she was born. And I just remember I just couldn't look down. I just had to, I was so scared to see her. And I just remember just staring at the ceiling behind me. And my mum kept telling me how beautiful she was. And they told me I had a girl. And I was so excited because that's all I wanted. But I was so angry as well because I finally got this girl, but I knew I wasn't going to be taking her home. And my mum just kept saying how beautiful she was, but I couldn't look at her. And I wish I did sooner, but I just couldn't. And they wrapped her in the blanket. And then I finally said that I would see her. And I held her when they passed her to me. And she was so beautiful. My mum was right. And all of a sudden, my sadness was just so different. It was just not about me anymore. I couldn't care less about me or if I was going to be okay or bringing a baby home or what other people thought. I just felt so sorry for her. And I just looked at her and my heart broke physically for her. And I just looked at this poor little baby who I was supposed to protect. And I just felt like I failed her so bad. Um, and all of a sudden, my life just changed and it was just so it was just all about her and she is my entire life. And I got to hold her for a little while. And then I introduced her to my family. My family came in one by one. And that was really hard because it was so bittersweet. It was kind of like I was excited to show off this beautiful little person that I created. But it was so sad at the same time. And they came in and but prior to that, I couldn't get my placenta out. So I think she was held by my family, and they had to manually remove that. And then I had her. I just remember holding her and introducing her to everyone. Her skin kind of like started to sort of like fold a little bit, um, and she would weep from the eyes, a bit of blood, and from the nose and the mouth.
Oh.
Which was really hard to watch because I felt like she was suffering. Um, and that just really hurt me all over again. Um, and to be honest, there's parts of that time that I can remember and there's parts that I can't. I remember having a shower. There was like a cuddle cot, they call it, and it's a cot that is cold. So when I first held her, she was so warm and so beautiful, and she looked like she was at peace. Um, and then she had to go into the cold cot so that I don't really know what for, but I'm assuming it's just to help preserve her body. Um, and so then after I held her, she was cold, and she was like icy cold. And that just doesn't feel real. I think because us humans, we're warm and we're always warm to touch. So that was very hard to hold her so cold. Um, made me feel for her as well. Um, and then I remember having a shower and I I kind of didn't know what happens from here. I'd never experienced anything like this before, and it was getting later. They told me that we could stay the night, but they gave me a sleeping tablet, which I wasn't too happy about. I wished that I could have just stayed awake all night. Um, and they let the three of us stay there the night together. Um, and to be honest, I could have probably lived in that room for the rest of my life just to have her with me. Um, and then I'm my parents or my dad, he's Catholic, and so we are Catholic and believe in God, but we're not very religious. I always say I'm probably one of the worst Catholics out there. Um, but I really wanted to hope that Milo had gone to heaven, um, and that her soul had gone to heaven, and I wanted her to be baptized. And I remember them telling me that they're not allowed to baptize dead babies, pretty much. Um, and I couldn't understand why, and I was a bit angry, but they said that they could bless her instead, and that her soul is so pure that she would already be in heaven. Um, So the next day we had a lady from Heartfelt. She came out and she's a free service and they take photos
Mm.
um, for you. And we had the priest come in and he blessed Milo. Um, and we had a few extra family come and meet her. And I had two women that I work with come and meet her as well. It was very bizarre though. Everything
Was
happened so
so the ladies that
fast.
had was
Um,
the ladies from work the ones that had the babies?
No, so it was two ladies that I worked in the office with. So I'd worked with them for over a year by that stage. Um, and one of them had messaged me, or I had to message them, or Kyle had to message them to say I wouldn't be at work and tell them what had happened. So they were kind of like the only people outside of my family that knew what had happened. So they were messaging me. And I remember messaging one of them and I said that I wish you could have met her, and they said that they wish they could have too, and that if if I would like for them to come and meet her. So that's how they ended up coming, which was really nice. Um, I would have shown her off to everyone if I had the opportunity to, but everything
Mm-hmm.
happened kind of so quickly after she was born, and we only got about 24 hours with her ourselves. So I was, I, I wish that I could have been in the frame of mind I'm in now
Did
to
you?
make
Yeah.
decisions.
Yeah, of course. And I guess that's what I want to do with the podcast is share so much about this so that if somebody is to go through it, because when we're in it, we don't know, but also no one really talks about these things. And so did the hospital guide you through inviting people in, what was going to happen next, having heartfelt photography come out, or like how did all that unfold?
So the hospital were the people that explained to us about heartfelt and cast a memory. So we also had two ladies from cast a memory come and take molds of Milo's hands and feet and prints of her hands and feet that we could keep, which I have
Yeah,
one of her hands and one of her feet shrunken down on my necklace with me at the moment.
so
Um,
beautiful.
Thank you. And so the hospital were helpful in that sense. Julie, the midwife, who was beautiful, she took photos of Milo for me, um, but she had been dressed by that point. So one of my regrets is not looking at Milo, and it sounds so strange, but not looking at her naked and in her full form because I was too scared to look at her when she was
Mm.
born because I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know how I would react. It took me a while. So she was wrapped in the hospital blanket. And then because I was sitting on a hospital bed and in the state I was in, the midwife had dressed her in the outfit that I bought. I think the week I found out I was pregnant, I went into pumpkin patch and it was closing down at the time, and there was this beautiful little outfit, and it was had on it. To me, you are perfect, and she really was perfect. And when I was having her, I love music. Music is something that soothes my soul and quietens down my head noise when I'm feeling anxious. So I listen to music regularly, and one of the things they said to us when I was going through labor was that I could listen to music. So I had the Divide album by Ed Sheeran at the time. So we brought that to the hospital and that played while I was in labor. And one of the songs that we listened to was Perfect by Ed Sheeran. And it just seemed perfect um, for Milo. Um, they asked me what we wanted to name her, and it's funny, her name was never meant to be Milo. We again didn't know what the gender of our baby was. So I had lists in my phone galore and we had names picked out, or a few names picked out for each sex. And my husband liked Mila for a girl. And I remember we were at my parents' house and we told my dad, and my dad joked around and he said to us, "Oh, and if it's a boy, you'll have to call it Milo." And the name just kind of stuck. And my mum would often message me, "How's Milo going?" And Milo became the baby's nickname towards the end. And um,
Cute.
the night before we had her and she was born, Kyle and I discussed it, and we said that um, this, that despite the sex of the baby, we wanted to call the baby Milo. That's how we affectionately knew he or she, and that's who was inside of us, and that's who we lost. And so yeah, so that's how Milo came about. We hadn't given it much thought, so it's Milo, like the cereal. I tell
Yeah.
everyone, um, and and yeah, her name's Milo. Milo Lily Lanzini. Lily was my grandmother's name, who passed away not too long before we got engaged. And she was quite close to my husband and I. So if we had a girl, we just knew that its middle name would be Lily. Um,
So
and
beautiful.
thank you. We ended up spending the night with Milo, and then the next day we had all the people come and do everything. But I really wish I had soaked it in a little bit more, and I wish that I maybe asked to spend more time with her, or asked to undress her or dress her. I've met women since having Milo that bathed their stillborn baby and did other things like that. I didn't even have my phone to take photos. The only photos I have are heartfelts and the photos that my family I'm very fortunate enough to have taken. Um, but if I could tell myself anything, it would be to just take more photos and soak it in, and maybe introduce her to more of my family, um, or my best
Mm,
friend. Um, but again, it's such a hard thing. It's it's not something that happens every day. It's not something that we know too much about. So I was learning it all for the very first time, and I remember the next day, the Tuesday, we had to say goodbye to Milo, and they asked if we wanted an autopsy done. They said that it could potentially help any future children of ours, and help for research. And as
mm,
much as having that done to my tiny little baby, I knew that she would want to help people, and I like to help people, and I think she would have been like me in that regard. So we decided to have the autopsy done. And I think because of that, maybe that's why she maybe had to be taken so soon. I really don't know.
okay.
Um, I never asked that question, but I it, mm, we didn't have any sort of pinks or anything picked out. And I remember when Milo was born, Kyle's mother, she went and bought a pink blanket, and she brought it into the hospital, and we wrapped Milo in that pink blanket so she wasn't in a hospital one all the time. And so we were wrapping her in that, and my sisters bought a little pink elephant, and we ended up getting another little hospital band, and we put that around the pink elephant. And that they were just the two things that I had for Milo. And when we said goodbye to her on the next day, I was holding her, and we put Perfect on by Ed Sheeran again. Um, it just seemed to make it not so cold. Um, and I think Kyle had kissed her goodbye. Um, and I grabbed a hold of her, and I gave her to Julie, and I told Julie that she was Milo's best friend, and I thanked her for being Milo's first and best friend. Um, and I told her to look after her. And before I said goodbye to Milo, I told her that I would make her proud, and I've held on to those words every day since. And I think they've really helped me be a better person. Um, and I remember handing her over to Julie, and I took the big blanket away, and I turned my back, and I never turned back. I just walked out. And I think if I had have turned back around, they would have had to drag me away because I wouldn't have been able to leave her. Until this day, that's definitely the hardest thing I've ever done. I think I missed her instantly. Um, and I grabbed that blanket and I held onto it, and we walked out. And I remember getting into the elevator, Kyle and I think my parents were with me. And this other couple, they got into the elevator with us, and they had a capsule with a baby in it.
Oh,
And I remember just looking at them and staring. And I remember thinking to myself, why them and not us? And why this baby and not Milo? And what did I do wrong? And what did we do to deserve this? And I just remember staring at them. And they had no idea what we had just done or been through. And we left and we drove home. Um, I think my dad had taken the car seat out of my car. And I just remember driving home, and the the world just was so different. And the color. I remember so vividly. It seems so strange, but it was like the color had been sucked out of the trees and the sky, and everything around me was just so dull. Um, and it was, yeah, I just remember it just seemed so lifeless. And I could go back to my home. I could go back there, and we went into my parents' house again, and we stayed there. I think for a total of a month. And my family would just go back to my house and get me some more clothes, and um, we were there for a while. So we went home on the Tuesday, and Milo was then taken to the Westmead Children's Hospital in Sydney to have her autopsy performed. Um, and then I had people coming and going. There was so many flowers. Um, People were just sending flowers to my parents' house. People were messaging me because we finally put something up on Facebook to say that Milo had been born. So then I started getting messages and calls, and I just didn't want to answer anyone because I truthfully didn't know what to say to them. And and that was all very hard. I just remember um, I felt like I lost my will to live, if that makes sense. I know I definitely, I wasn't suicidal, but
Absolutely.
I just didn't have a desire to eat food or to brush my teeth or to brush my hair or to shower or to shave or to put deodorant on. I kind of just didn't see the point because I didn't care. Life was never going to be the same. I didn't know what my life was. I didn't know anything, and I just was so confused and lost and sad. And I remember one night my mum had ordered pizza for us all. So my family kind of had stayed for a few days, and mum had ordered pizza, and I, I just couldn't even eat that. And I remember saying to my mum, I was rubbing my chest, and I said, Mum, I feel like I'm having a heart attack. I said, my heart, it hurts. And um, I didn't have a heart attack, but I can only put it down to physically feeling my heart breaking. And I swear to God, I could never use the word heartbreak the way I used to throw it around so willy nilly before having Milo. I think a boyfriend
Yeah.
might have left me and I thought I was heartbroken, but um, I definitely wasn't. There was, Milo defined the word heartbreak to me, and heartbreak isn't just a word. It's definitely a feeling, and I definitely felt my heart breaking in my chest
Yeah.
and sinking and just aching, and I honestly felt like I was having a heart attack. And then that made me anxious. I was just my anxieties were through the roof. And then I remember the midwives coming to the house, so they would still come and check on me, which was good. And they obviously were informed that, you know, Milo was stillborn, that I didn't have her with me.
Yeah.
And they were really good. They were, I guess, as good as they can be. Um, and then it was a Friday, and my family had finally left, so they were hanging around me, not wanting to leave me, which was beautiful. But they all had lives to get on with, I guess, and um, a few of them went to do some other things, and my mum and one of my brothers went up the road to get some groceries. And a midwife came to the hospital for my last check, and um, she was having a look at my stitches and just checking everything down there. And when she left, she was happy with everything, and she left. And then I said to Kyle that I wanted to have a shower just to freshen up, and I had a dress on, and I went into the shower and I pulled the dress up. And I used the shower head to just clean myself up. And as I stepped out of the shower, I just started bleeding. It was like someone had turned a tap on, and there was just blood gushing out of me. And before that day and in the hospital with Milo, some people would say to me, everything happens for a reason, which hurt me so much inside, but I would never say
Yeah.
anything to somebody. So I just sort of absorbed all of that. And and I remember when I was bleeding, I yelled out to Kyle, who came in, and I told him to call an ambulance, and it was just everywhere. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm not ready to die. But I also remember thinking this is probably why Milo passed away, because I wasn't going to be here. I'm going to die, and I'm not going to be here to look after her. So that was there everything happens for a reason. So I just
Yeah.
remember saying, I don't want to die. And I remember telling Kyle, I don't want to die. Please don't let me die.
Mhm.
And
Mm.
I was about to slip over because there was just so much blood everywhere, and I was in the bathroom, so I was on the tiles, and Kyle was on the phone to the ambulance, and I made my way over to the toilet, and I put the toilet seat down, and I sat on it to try to, because I felt like I was going to pass out, and then I was sliding off the toilet, so I put my feet up, and I was trying to hold myself on, and I was just wanting my mum as well, and I was just yelling out to Kyle to ring my mum, and he was in a state of panic, so he was at the door. He didn't come into the bathroom, but he stayed at the door, and he had two phones going, one to the ambulance and one to my mum. And I can't remember who got there first, but my mum and my brother came, and I remember the look on their faces, and I remember my mum walking in, and she hugged me, and I just told her, I said, "I just don't want to die, Mum." I said, "Please don't let me die." And I was so scared. It was weird because um, I didn't want to live, but I didn't want to die either. It was a weird situation to be in. And
Yeah.
the ambulance got there, and it was a young guy and a woman. And the young guy was really good. He came in, and I just said to him, "Please, am I going to die?" And he said he can't tell me that. um,
Oh.
And so that freaked me out more. And he said, "We've got to get you to a hospital." So, and I remember the smell of the room it was the same smell when I birthed Milo. And I said that to him. And I remember saying, "This smell is like when I had Milo." I said, "It's wherever this blood is coming from, it's coming from wherever she came from."
Oh.
And
Wow.
yeah, and then he put me in. Um, they took me into the hospital, and they gave me a drip in my arm, and the blood was just still coming out. I was laying in a pool of it, and I was so scared. It was all over me. It was on my legs, on my arms, and Kyle had come in the ambulance with me, and we went. They took me to the hospital that I was having my midwife appointments at, and that was the first time going back there since they told me that I needed to go for that third scan. So I went into the emergency, and I remember them opening the doors of the ambulance, and my dad was on the other end because my family know everything. As soon as something's happening, everyone knows. And my dad was
Yeah.
there. And I just remember seeing his face, and it just made me feel safe. And I just told my dad that I didn't want to die either. And they took me in to the emergency, and there was doctors coming and going. No one really told me anything. They were jabbing me with needles and taking my clothes off and giving me more drips in my arm. And then I could see my family on the other side of the glass, and they were just trying to. My mum was crying, and she was trying to ask them where I was, and they finally let my mum in. And I was still so scared. I didn't know what was happening. And then they said to me that they can't help me there, and that I needed to go to the other hospital where I birthed Milo. Um, and so then I got back in the ambulance, and they turned the sirens on, and my mum came in the ambulance this time with me because Kyle had been through so much, and he still came, but he went with my dad. And I remember being in in that ambulance for the second time, and the sirens were going, and we were speeding down the freeway, and I could see out of the curtain, and I could see the sky, and I just remember talking to Milo and asking her to help me. And I was still so scared. Um, and then I got to the hospital where I had Milo, and they took me into the birthing suite where I had her, and a midwife congratulated me on Milo. And I just
Oh.
looked to the ground or the bed, and I started to cry. And my mum told her that Milo wasn't here, and then she started to cry. And then they wheeled me into a room, and I had other doctors coming in, and then they told me that they think I have an infection and that there could be placenta left over because my placenta didn't want to detach, and it had to be removed manually.
Uh-huh.
And so then I was put on a drip, and the ladies cleaned me up a bit, and my family were there. And then they said to me that I couldn't stay in that area of the hospital anymore because I didn't have my baby. I had to be with everybody
Oh.
else. So that kind of scared
Oh.
me and kind of made me feel bad because I'd had a baby literally
Yeah.
days ago, and I wasn't allowed to stay there anymore. And so I was wheeled down to where all the other patients and other things were happening, and I was luckily given my own room. Um, and Kyle slept on the floor, and I remember my mum slept on a bed somewhere else because I wouldn't let her leave. And
Yeah.
they checked, and I was luckily enough, I didn't need a blood transfusion, but my hemoglobin levels, I think they're called, they were okay.
Yeah.
So I was really lucky that I didn't need to have that done. But I was put on a drip for the 24 hours, and the bleeding slowly stopped. And then I was sent home the next day with some antibiotics. Um, but before that, I remember having a shower. The nurse, or she showered me, and I was sitting on this plastic chair in this hospital shower, naked, with drips in my arms, and my belly was all flabby and gross, and I was bleeding, and not severely this time, thankfully. And I remember just being so embarrassed in front of my husband because this was not what I envisioned. Um, I just felt very small, and I just felt very pathetic. Um, and then we left, and my parents drove us back to their house, and we stopped at the chemist and to fill my script of antibiotics. And I remember just crying in the back seat of the car, and I can't even explain how I felt, but I just felt like life had stopped, and I was so scared. By this point, I think I was riddled with anxiety, um, and
Mm-hmm.
I just didn't know how I felt. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what my future held. I didn't know anything. I didn't care about anything. I didn't want anyone to see me. And we went back to my parents, and in the days that followed, we planned Milo's funeral. She was finally brought back from Sydney, um, and she was taken to the crematorium place. Um, and we decided on what
How long did the
the
sorry, how long did
autopsy.
the autopsy take, and what are you glad you did that? How long what was that process like? Because we
I
decided
am
against that with Millie, and I know like some people regret not doing it, but I'd love to know details about doing it and what that was like.
It didn't. I think it took maybe about a week, if not a little bit longer. It was long. We couldn't have her funeral as soon because we had to wait for her to come back. So it wasn't too long, but maybe about a week before she was back at our dedicated or our chosen place of. I think we went with White Lady Funerals, so they
Mm-hmm.
got her maybe a week later. It took about 6 months
Yeah.
for her preliminary report to come back, and then a year for her full report,
Wow. Oh
which did come
wow.
back. Yeah, so it was a long wait. Um, I don't know how I feel about having it done. I guess I can't go back, but for the for months that followed, I used to become really distraught thinking about them cutting her open. Um, the thought
Mm.
of it just made me feel physically sick. Um, and I just didn't like that. It just and the fact that I wasn't there to hold her hand or there to make sure that they just took care of her,
Mm.
and the fact that she went in a car all the way to
Yeah.
Sydney by herself, or something by herself. That just those thoughts just constantly
Mm.
went through my mind. So it would have been nice not to have those memories or those thoughts or ideas. But she ended up coming back to the White Lady funerals, and it sounds odd, but I just remember I wanted to make sure it was her, and I wanted to make sure she was okay.
Yeah.
And but I knew that if I saw her, I wouldn't let her go. I'd probably literally bring her home with me and just tell them to give me my baby, and I probably could have held her and sat there for the rest of my life. Um, and
Yeah.
so I knew I couldn't see her. So I asked my mum and Kyle's mum and my dad if they could go and see Milo and dress her and put. When I was
Mm.
younger, my parents bought me a crucifix, and I remember having it blessed, and it was a child's one, so I kept it. And I remember all my life I knew I was going to have. Well, I was hopeful to have a child, and I said my first child I will give this to, and so I wanted Milo to have that.
Mm.
So they went to my house and they got that, and my mum had a name bracelet made for her, and there was a little teddy, and a blanket. So I gave all of that to my parents and Nicole's mum, and they took it to the um, funeral home, and they saw her. Um, and they took pictures of her, which I'm really glad because I got to see. But to be honest, I kind of wish I went and saw her. But again, I may have kidnapped her and took her home with me, which sounds weird to kidnap your own child. But um, I felt like I was her parent, but I didn't get to parent her. So that was, yeah, a bit hard. But they made sure it was her. um, and they dressed her and they wrapped her in the blanket and put a necklace on her. And then I remember the lady that was doing the service. She came out to my mum's house to go through the funeral details, and she opened up the coffins because I had to pick one, and there wasn't many to choose from, and they were so small that as soon as I saw the coffin on the piece of paper, it broke my heart, and I couldn't look at it. And I remember her saying to me, we still had to choose one because she was cremated in it. Um, and I chose to have her cremated because I wanted to have her with me. I didn't want to put her in the ground and her to be by herself. Um, and so the lady, she suggested that we have Milo cremated before her funeral so that I could take her straight home with me. So we decided to have that. And I remember we had her funeral in April. So she was born on the 27th of March, and on the 11th of April we had her funeral. Um, and I remember they gave me, after her service, they gave me the box with her urn in it, which I have. She's with me. Here she is. Um,
Hello, beautiful.
and so they gave it to me, and I remember sitting in my car, and Cole drove us home, and I remember opening the box, and there was a slip on top of her urn, and had um, it had my details on it, as if I was the person that was cremated. And I remember that just scared me, and that was just uh, so hard to look at. Anyway, it turns out that they had it wrong, and after so many months, I started seeing a counselor who helped me with that when I told her, and she contacted them, and they sent me new ones with Milo's details, not my own, because
Wow.
I'm very much alive. But so yeah, so that was just another thing
Wow.
that kind of stuck with me and scared me. Um, and then
Mm.
I was just, yeah, for the months that followed, we stayed at my parents' house and we slept on the lounge. Sorry, we slept on a mattress in the lounge room. And I would find it really hard to sleep. And then I would wake up early and I'd go and sit in the study and just look at pictures of Milo because Heartfelt had sent them through. And and I'd just play songs and I'd just cry. And and then my family started making me go outside to get sun. um, my husband shaved my legs for me. Um, my family were making me food. And I'm so lucky to have the family and the support that I have. They helped both myself and Kyle so much, and I think everyone was so focused on me having been the one that carried Milo and birthed Milo and had the hemorrhaging, and um, they were all still very supportive of Kyle, but um, I guess in a sense the dads sort of don't get pushed to the side, but I guess they're going through their own thing as well. But everyone seems to focus, I guess, on the mum more so. Um, so that was something that I was mindful of at the time, but probably not as much as I was after I started to get better mentally. Um, and in the
Yeah.
months that followed too, I ended up seeing. Um, I went and saw the doctor. So there was a doctor who helped me birth Milo. His name was Andrew, and I remember seeing him for my 6-week checkup. And I asked him previously to going to that appointment. I rang the place where I had my ultrasounds and I said, "Can I please get a report of both my ultrasounds?" Because I wanted to know what after I became better, not better in myself, but after I started to then wonder why, and I started to look into things a little bit more. And I'd rang the clinic that I had my scans and I asked for a report, which they emailed to me, because they actually rang me a couple of days after Milo was born to confirm my appointment for that third scan, and we had to tell them that there will be no scan because I've already had my baby.
Mm.
Um,
Wow.
so that was really hard. Just all those little things you kind of don't think of, or like lay-bys of
Mm.
furniture that we had, or a rocking chair. I remember we had a rocking chair on lay-by, and they rang us to say that that had arrived. Um, but I had my 6 week checkup, and I showed him the paperwork, and I asked him to explain it to me, and he said that Milo pretty much plateaued. She didn't continue to grow. So that kind of made me angry because I was then wondering why they allowed me to go for a third scan, knowing that she wasn't growing, and why they didn't give me an opportunity to discuss
Mm.
those results. It was all very much just, you missed your appointment, and that I had to accept that. Um, and then I remember he pretty I pretty much asked him. I said, "What happened to Milo?" And he didn't say in so many words, but and as a mum, and in my heart and in my gut, I feel that my placenta didn't do its job properly, and it didn't give her what she needed to continue to grow. So, um, we ended up I went to I'm not sure what they're called exactly, but the person that you go to, I guess, in a hospital that handles complaints. And I spoke to this lady who I was in touch with, and I explained to her my situation, and I made it clear to her. I said, I'm not so much angry. I said, I am angry. I'm sad. I'm upset. I said, but I want you to be aware of what happened so that you can fix your practices, so that you can help someone. I said, I have a little sister. I said, I work at a school.
Yeah.
There's, so many girls, so many boys, so many families, so many people out there that are going to have babies in the future. Um, that I want to make sure that they're looked after, and and if I can help just one person, I said that's what I want to do. And I remember saying to her, asking her for help, and she ended up organizing a meeting for myself and Kyle to talk to the doctor at the smaller hospital where I was having my maternity appointments. Um, and apparently he's the head of the doctors, and the other doctors and Andrew are his registrars. Well, I'm not really sure the correct
Okay.
terminology, but there's like a head doctor, and then this is how I was explained it, and then there's the doctors under him. So the doctor that I originally saw at the hospital, who told me Milo was small, who ended up telling me Milo passed away, he was a registrar. And Andrew, who helped me
Okay.
birth Milo, and who I saw at my 6 week checkup, he was a registrar. So they were sort of on par. And then there's a doctor above them
Okay.
who oversees everything, and is kind of their boss. So I asked to see him because apparently he was the one that the midwife saw that day and who said, go for a third scan. So I wanted to ask him why he thought it was appropriate for me to go for a third
Mm.
scan. So we went to the hospital, and it was my first time being back there since getting driven there in the ambulance. And we were taken into a meeting room, and there was myself, my dad, and my mother-in-law, and then he sat across from me with a midwife next to him, and the lady was at the end of the table who handled the complaints. The first red flag that I should have probably looked out for was the fact that the lady handling the complaint, she said that she used to work with this doctor, and she had only nice things to say about him. So I feel like her
Okay.
opinion was kind of already decided, and she wasn't going
Mm.
in sort of as a a neutral party.
Middle
Um,
ground. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, someone that was sort of not related to me, not didn't know him, could just sort of give an open
Mm.
mind about the situation. Anyway, I kind of talked to him. I was very cranky, but for the first time in my life, I wanted to be assertive, and I didn't want to be rude because that's not in my nature. And I told Milo I'd make her proud, and I didn't want to turn into a nasty person, but I also wanted to be assertive, and I wanted to be strong, and I wanted to be the person I
Mm.
wished I had been earlier in my life. Um, and I remember asking him, I said, you told me to go for a third scan, um, and he said, I remember parts of the conversation, and he said to me that it's not just little babies that die. Mind you, Mila was pretty decent for when I birthed her. 36 and 5 days. So she was nearly 37 weeks. Um, and he
Mm.
said to me, it's not just little babies that die, it's big babies die too. He said he delivered a baby that morning and that baby was too big and that baby died. And that's exactly how he said that to me. And then he went on to try to give me reasons as to why Milo was, her size and what have you. And he said she wasn't actually that small. And then he showed me some paperwork and he had highlighted parts all over it. And I picked up on some things that he'd actually had wrong on there. And then he just sort of grabbed the paper and that was it. Um, and then I said to him, I said, I was told you were too busy that day. I said, I would have waited, I would have come back. And he said to me, I was too busy that day. I didn't even get to eat my lunch. And then I said about my missed appointment, and he said that was it was just a fault on the system or what have you. They're getting it looked at. I said that the midwife, I said she didn't check me. I said I these knew something was wrong. This was why I was having, extra gross scans. I said that midwife never checked the size of my stomach. She never checked the baby's heartbeat. She never checked my blood pressure. You know, I I came to you because there was something wrong. I said, and all I got was, you know, poor information to go for a third scan. Not once did anyone look at me, or I said I explained that my movements were decreased. He said, "Oh, that midwife's really upset, and she's getting further training." And she's very upset. You should
Oh.
know. And I remember just thinking, I'm not angry at her, but I'm upset too. Um, and
Mm.
I kind of didn't
Mm.
really like that answer. But then then he, I felt like I felt like I wasn't winning. It wasn't a competition. Nothing I said or did could bring Milo back. I was just trying to get my point across to him that I believe that there could have been that my situation could have been handled differently, and therefore I didn't want that to happen again. And I explained that to him, and I said, I will not be coming back here if I ever fell pregnant again. I said, and anyone I know will not be coming back here. It's too risky. And he
Mm.
said he wouldn't change a thing. He would do it all the same again. So I felt like I was getting nowhere. And then I felt like he wanted to scare me. So I had lots of blood tests done before having Milo. And he
Mm.
started to scare me and he said, oh, your blood work came back and, you tested positive to the herpes virus or something. Anyway, I'm scared of germs and I'm scared of dying. So as soon as he said that to me, my heart
Mm.
sank and my palms started to sweat and my anxiety kicked in. And I went from being up top to being down the bottom. And he just crushed every
Mm.
ounce of assertiveness I had going for me at that minute. And I said, "What are you saying?" And I just said, "What does that mean?" And the midwife who was actually sitting next to him, she stopped him. She put her hand on him and she stopped him and she said that could have been worded very differently. And she looked at me and she said,
Oh.
"Ashlee, you're okay. I want you to know you're all right. And it's just you've tested positive to an antibody for the herpes virus, which is like a cold sore." She said, "Have you ever been around
Mm.
anyone?" I said, "Look, my sister and my dad get cold sores. I don't." And she said, "That's why." She said, "You've got the
Mm.
antibody in you." She goes, "You've also got so many other antibodies." She goes, "Like there's a whole list here I could list off to you." And um, I felt that was after then we ended up leaving and I shook his hand, which I wish I never did, and we left. And I
Mm.
just couldn't understand why he would say that to me in that way. It didn't need to be said. It was unnecessary information. And the way he said it to me was almost like he wanted to scare me and make me feel
Mm.
worse than I already was feeling. And this is a man who's dealing with pregnant women every day and families, and that just frightens me um, and just made me feel sad. And I just knew that I wasn't getting anywhere and that I wouldn't get anywhere. So I kind of left it. I felt like I kind of, I tried to help, and that was as far as I got. Um, and to be honest, I could have maybe pushed it further, but I felt like I'm a little person in this big wide world, and I wasn't sort of in the frame of mind as well to, I guess try and push more. My thought process was to try to get myself better, and I just after a certain amount of time I just really wanted to try to have another baby. And I think a lot of that was
Mm.
um I remember going into the shops and would see pregnant women pushing prams. And I remember feeling like I just wanted to wear a sign that said, I'm a mum and I've had a baby and I've
Yeah.
done exactly what you've
Yeah.
done, but I just didn't get to take my
Mm-hmm.
baby home. Or, or they'd be looking at me because I'd be staring at this child in a pram, or I'd go into David Jones and look at all those beautiful pink clothes that I'd looked at so many times that I couldn't wait to buy. And I was just still gravitated to all the baby stuff. And I remember we finally went home and we shut the door to Milo's bedroom for quite some time before I could go in there and start going through our items and picking out what I wanted to keep and what I wanted to donate. Um, and what I may keep if I was to ever have another baby. And I remember just thinking about my husband as well. And I remember thinking that I couldn't give him a baby. And I remember
Mm.
we'd see other women or we'd have friends and they were having babies or doing that family stuff. And we'd been together so long, we'd built the house, we'd had the wedding. That was what we wanted to do. That was what I thought we wanted to do next. And we just wanted to do all those family things. And I remember being so angry towards women that would complain about their babies, or, they'd put stuff up
Mm.
about, oh God, mum life, or can't wait for the kids to go back to school. And I'd be like, God damn you, how dare you say that? You
Yeah.
don't understand how lucky you are and you should be grateful. And, or I'd see women pregnant at the bus stop, or they'd be smoking cigarettes, and I'd be like, your
Mm-hmm.
baby's probably going to be born fine. And I did everything. I didn't drink Coke. I
Yep.
didn't drink coffee. I didn't drink tea. Um,
Mm.
I did everything, to the textbook to help my baby. And I remember, yeah, I was very bitter and sour for a very long time. I remember being at work, and the lady who had her baby days before me, she came in to drop something off, and she had her baby with her. And I work at reception, so I see everyone that comes in, and I ran off into the bathroom crying because I just couldn't look. And I felt so
Of
bad,
course.
because that's her place
Did
of
she
work.
let you
But
know that she was going to come in?
no, she did apologize to me, and she said that she would have left the baby in the car had she been able to. Um, but then I felt bad for her
Mm.
to be thinking that. I didn't want people to have to tiptoe around me, or to
Mm.
change their life for me. So it was I found that, especially that first year, and that first year of firsts, so difficult
Mm.
to navigate. And after a while, everyone goes back to their life, and it's sort of after the funeral, and we went back to our home, and everyone's life goes back to normal, but yours is just so different. Yours is never going to be the same, and yours is forever changed. And I felt like grieving my stillborn baby was so lonely. No one wanted to talk about her, and they were scared that they would make me sad. So
Mm.
they would either avoid me, or they wouldn't want to talk about it, or I'd go to talk about it and then they'd look awkward. Or so over time, I kind of learned
Mm.
who wants to talk about it and who doesn't. Um, and then with more time, and I also started to see a counselor fortnightly, who I saw fortnightly for 4 years, who helped me so much.
Great.
I
Mm.
ended up also knowing when to talk about her and when not to talk about her. And I think, people say that time heals, and um, it definitely hasn't made that sadness and that pain go away. There's definitely a lot more time in between crying. So when Milo first passed away, I'd just cry constantly, and it felt like I was crying more so than I was not crying. Whereas now I'm not crying as much as I am crying, and sometimes I even feel guilty about that. Um,
Mm.
but yeah, it just felt very lonely. I remember I lost my nan not long before I got engaged, and still to this day, my family will talk about her, or there's a memory, and we'll mention, when Nana did this funny thing, or we've got so many photos, or we've got videos, and we can hear her voice. But we've got nothing of Milo. We've got a handful of photos, and there's no videos, and no one has any memories. Um, Only my immediate family. So I felt like grieving her was a very lonely. It's still very lonely, um, and and that kind of makes me feel sad as well, because I don't get to share her. So, truthfully, I share her in my own time now, which is quite sad. But I notice when I'm by myself, I'll sort of hear her song, or or something will come up, and I'll cry by myself. Sometimes I'll cry to my family, but the more that time's gone on, I kind of just do it by myself. But my husband and I, we tried to have another baby. About probably 6 months later, we decided that we would, if it happens, it happens. Anyway, it took us about a year, and we still hadn't conceived, and we'd fallen so quickly with Milo that I kind of just assumed it would happen quickly. Um, and then we went and saw my local doctor, and he said, "Look, we can steer you on the path of IVF since it's been a year." Um, so then we got in touch with an IVF clinic, and I actually did 2 rounds of IVF, where I had to give myself the injections. I had to go down to Sydney and be put to sleep and have my eggs taken out, and then they were put together.
Yeah.
And um, I remember waking up and then write how many eggs they got on my hand, and I had like 18, I think, the first time. But then I'd be at work and I'd get a call to say 4 had survived, and then the next day only 2, and then on the 5th day, sorry, 1 survived.
Wow.
Then I'd have to drive back down and do the transfer, and then I'd have to wait 2 weeks and then have another blood test to see if I was pregnant or not. So we did that twice, and um, that was very taxing, I think, on my mental health. Um, I remember just feeling like I was letting my husband down, and I remember feeling like I remember thinking to myself, I bet he wishes he was with that pregnant woman, or friends of ours who had got pregnant. And it's weird what you think in your mind, but I just thought, oh, I bet he wishes he picked a
Yeah.
different wife, or picked someone that could, do the one thing that us women are supposed to do. And I remember just, yeah, I would beat myself up about it, and I'd be at work and I'd get a call to say that no embryos had survived, like, one had survived, and or then I'd get a call to say, sorry, your blood test came back, you're not pregnant, and I'd just cry at work and I was embarrassed. And then I'd go home and I was just so upset, and my anxiety was just through the roof. Um, and then I remember my little sister, she fell pregnant, and I'm very close with her. There's 3 years in between us, and I was so happy for her, but I was so jealous, and that hurt me too. So
Of course.
um, I just felt like, why was I jealous of this person that I love so much having a baby? But it wasn't that I was jealous of her being happy. It was just that I was jealous that we didn't get to have that, and I was jealous that, I was more upset that Milo didn't get to be here, and get to know my family the way we would get to know her baby. So I was really hoping she would have a boy, and she did. And he's beautiful,
Good.
and I have such a beautiful connection with him, and he helped me in ways I never thought possible. Um,
Yeah.
and we ended up the third, um, I think it was the second time we did the IVF, we ended up being able to freeze a couple of embryos, and it was about July, and I think we started at the beginning of the year, so it'd been about 6 months, and we had some frozen embryos, and I just needed a break, so we went on a little holiday. And when we got back, we decided to do a frozen transfer. So the others had been fresh, and um, we did a frozen transfer, and it wasn't as intense. I didn't have to give myself as many injections because the embryo, the had already been created and developed. It
Did
just
you
had
have your embryos tested?
no.
So did you ever get the results back from the autopsy to know whether there was anything wrong with Milo and then test the embryos, or?
Yeah, so we did get our the autopsy results back, and they were inconclusive. So it was actually quite nice to look and read because they talked about all of her organs, and it sounds so morbid, but it was so beautiful to know that everything was working fine, and she had all of these, you know,
Okay.
to hear about her in that way, it made her feel more real. I think because we only had such a
Yeah.
short time with her, sometimes it was like she was a figment of my imagination. Um, and
Mm-hmm.
the pink blanket actually had some blood of hers on it, and I slept with that blanket for years afterwards.
Mm.
Um, I would also take Milo's ashes everywhere I went because I never wanted her to be at home by herself. And it reminded me she was real.
Yeah.
But it came back inconclusive. It said she died of a hypoxic, hypertensive event, so a sudden lack of oxygen to her brain. So I'll never know why Milo passed away. Um, but I believe that my placenta, because the placenta also has an age span as well. So they eventually die, they don't last forever. And so I feel like my placenta was maybe growing too fast for Milo. So my pregnancy was great, but as we got sort of towards the end, the placenta had
Mm.
already aged and stopped doing its job, and Milo stopped
Mm.
getting what she needed to continue to grow and to continue to give her what she needed to survive. And sometimes I believe that that big kick that she did up in my ribs was sort of her
Mm.
goodbye. That was the last time I remember
Mm.
feeling her. So, um,
Do you
yeah, I
think
think
that
that
at that
was,
like so do you think that at the 32 weeks that had the doctors have been more, mm, if they had have listened to you more, if they had have given a fuck more,
yeah,
would they have, potentially given you the opportunity to
saved.
induce you at that point and saved her?
I do. I definitely feel that she could have had a fighting chance at least. I can't say she would have definitely lived, and um,
Mm.
but I definitely think that she could have had a better chance. And I think that had they cared more,
Mm-hmm.
my daughter might be here, and my life would have
Yeah.
been totally different. Um, but
Mm.
yeah, I definitely think she would have had a fighting chance. And sometimes I remember saying to my mum as well, I said to her, you know, I imagine going in there with your sick child in your arms who's starving virtually. Someone would have to do something.
Mm-hmm.
But because she was inside of me and I'm a young mum and blah, 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 I just feel like it was
Mm.
dismissed. And that's what saddens me. That little person that's in your stomach is a life, and they deserve to be looked after just as much as any other person coming in and walking in. Um, and I
Absolutely.
definitely think that she deserved a better chance. And for that, I'll always be angry. I'll always feel anger and resentment. But
Mm-hmm.
I've learnt to not let go of that, but I've learnt to live with that, I guess. I always say that I definitely haven't moved
Yeah.
on. I definitely haven't gotten over it. I definitely don't believe everything happens for a reason.
Mm.
Anyone that says that to me,
Yeah.
that goes through one ear and out the other. I think it's just to make themselves feel better or to give them something to say to somebody going through something. But to be honest, the best thing you can just say is, I'm sorry, or this sucks, or give them a hug,
Yeah.
or just sit there with them and be in their presence. But yeah, I definitely think that Milo could have been looked after a lot better, and we could have been in a different situation. Um,
Mm.
yeah, we did end up doing the um, transfer of the embryo, and I did fall pregnant, um, which was beautiful. But it was also so
Yeah.
scary. It was the most scariest time. I felt like I had the weight of the world on my shoulders to right all the wrongs I did with Milo. Not that I did anything wrong, but obviously I just
Mm.
felt, very responsible, I guess. Um, and I remember doing everything in my power. I went to a different hospital. I saw different people. I was very much more on top of things, and I spoke my mind. I was never rude, but I just made sure I got my point across.
Yeah.
We drove to the hospital multiple times with worried about the movement just to get the child, the baby, looked after. And I was
Mm.
adamant to them that I wouldn't go over 36 and 5 days. I said to them that they need to take this baby
Yeah.
out. I knew that there was a risk, but the risk of
Mm.
going
Yeah.
full term scared me even more. Um,
Yeah.
and I ended up developing gestational diabetes in my second pregnancy, which was
Yeah.
a new thing to sort of get used to. Um, but that was, controlled, and the least of, I guess, my problems. Um, and then
Was it another public hospital that you had your second baby with?
it was, I had
Yeah.
my second baby at the John Hunter Hospital in Newcastle or New Lambton,
Yeah.
and they were really good. I saw an M3 team of midwives who were really good. They specialise with high risk women only. So they were really great. They were on top of everything. I felt like I was being heard. I felt stronger. I felt more knowledgeable. I'd done
Mm.
my homework a little bit more. Um, I knew that my movements mattered. I didn't want to become obsessed with my movements, but I was mindful of them, and I didn't become complacent after 12 weeks. I tried not to be so naive as well. Um, and I was just more on top of things. But that made me feel so bad because I felt like, why didn't I do that for Milo? And it wasn't that I didn't want to. I thought I was doing it, but I just didn't know. And I think that takes us back to that whole it's your first pregnancy, so you don't know. Um, and so I feel like Milo was ripped off
Mm-hmm.
in so many ways. Um, and then my daughter, I ended up finding out I was having another girl. And that was bittersweet. It was so beautiful because I just wanted a little girl so bad. But I felt so guilty. And I was so excited. And then towards the end of my pregnancy, COVID came out, and that was scaring me because, again, I'm an anxious person. I don't like germs. And here we are living with this disease that was taking over the world. And I remember raising concerns to my dad and my husband about it actually, and they were like, it's not nothing to worry about, it'll be over soon, the news just hype everything up. We also experienced the Australian bushfires as well, and there was all the smoke in the
Oh
air
yeah.
covering the Central Coast, and I was worrying about
Yeah.
that. So it was just 9 months of worry. But um, I ended up they ended up inducing me, and I had steroid injections before having her. And I gave birth to her on a Wednesday. So her name's Hallie Milo Lanzini. Milo after her big
Wow.
sister. um,
Yeah.
and she was born, and I cried as soon as she was born, and I wanted her straight on top of me.
Oh
And
man.
then my placenta wouldn't come out again. And given my history, they went and they put me to sleep, and I had it removed. So I wasn't with her for the first couple of hours. And then when I did wake up, it was nighttime, and my husband had to leave, and Hallie was back with me. But I was so disorientated, and I remember having a panic attack, and I remember pushing Hallie away. And that makes me feel guilty to Hallie. I think as mums, we're just always feeling guilty.
Mm.
I know I am anyway. Um,
Mm.
and I just
Mm.
remember pushing her away because I was very blessed to have this, to have a child here, and have her help here alive. Um, but I couldn't understand why she was allowed to stay and Milo wasn't allowed to stay. And I felt like I
Mm.
was,
Right.
before having Hallie, I was Milo's mum. And then I had Hallie, and I was Milo and
Mm.
Hallie's mum. And during my
Mm.
pregnancy, people would ask me, "Is this your first child?" And you get asked all lovely things. And but yeah, I
Mm.
kind of missed just being Milo's mum, and my whole world revolved around Milo. But now I had to share that with some other person who I'd just met, who I loved, but it was just so different. And it sounds awful. And I
Yeah.
love my daughter, both my daughters so much, but I'm fiercely protective of Milo and her memory. And even Hallie will say some things,
Mm.
or she'll go to kiss her sister, and I'll be very protective of Milo over Hallie. And I think it's because Milo's not here, and I feel like I need to be that voice for her, or that protector. Um, and sometimes I think Hallie's lucky to be here, and whereas Milo wasn't. And sometimes I think, I don't know if that makes me a bad mum, but Milo also definitely makes me a better mum. That, I know how blessed I am to have Hallie here, and how I don't want to take any of that for granted. But then at the same time, parenthood is so hard. And now that I'm physically experiencing it in a physical sense, sometimes I do find myself complaining, and then I feel guilty. And it's like, old Ashlee would hate this Ashlee, because she would say, "Be grateful." And I am so grateful, but it is so
Yeah.
hard. So there's just this never ending emotional roller coaster. And so we brought Hallie home in February. She was born on Kyle and my wedding anniversary, of all things. Um,
Oh
and
wow.
yeah, so she was born on the 26th of February, 26th of March. Sorry, 26th of February. I get Hallie and Milo mixed up
Yeah.
all the time too now. Um,
Yeah.
2020. And when we brought her home a couple of weeks later, we were in lockdown for the very first time, and I couldn't share her with family, and I couldn't have my mum over, and I was so anxious again. And I was so overwhelmed, and I was trying to be a mum, and I was trying to be Hallie's mum and Milo's mum, and I wanted my mum there so bad, and it was just so hard. But then again, I felt like I couldn't whinge about it because I needed to be grateful because out of all people on this earth, I knew what it was like to not have a baby, or to think, am I ever going to have another baby? Is it ever going to be on the cards for me? Especially doing IVF and that not
Mm.
working. It was something that
Right.
I wondered I might not ever have another child. So I do try to be grateful every second of every day, but that is very hard sometimes and
Mm.
unrealistic. But then Hallie was about 6 months old, and um, it it had been a very hard 6 months with COVID and lockdown restrictions, and trying to enjoy this little person that we finally got to bring into this world after so much agony, heartbreak, disappointment, um,
Mm.
and feeling ripped off again. I remember saying to Mum, I just feel ripped off again. I didn't.
Mm.
I don't get to push her around in the pram and show off my baby again but in a different way, as well as keeping in mind, how grateful I am, um, and how lucky I am. And I just had to keep reminding myself of that. And then, yeah, it was about Hallie was about 6 months old, and um, m- Kyle had left me and Hallie, or me, as he says. Um, and so he left the house and never came back. And then I was a single mum with a 6-month-old baby in the home
My
that
word.
I created with my husband, and where Milo was, where all of I guess, our memories with Milo were. Um, and so that was very hard.
Oh
I
gosh.
went, I remember going to my mum's house because I just didn't want to be by myself. I hadn't been by myself ever in my life.
Mm.
Um, and I missed him. And he's also my connection to Milo, and he's Milo's dad. And I don't think he to this day realizes how him leaving affected me. And it's
Mm.
been 3 years, um, this month, this month, 3 years. And it's taken a long time. But we co-parent
Yeah.
well for Hallie's sake. But it definitely was very hard trying to be a mum, trying to be a grieving mum, trying to be a single mum. Um, I
Far out.
just, yeah, and I missed my
And
friend.
navigate COVID,
Yeah,
navigate all of
navigating.
these things that the whole world was, going
Yeah,
through.
that's right. And I thought that this was what we wanted, and I'd worked so hard to get a baby here for both of us, um, and then to just be by myself, and we didn't experience the first
What was the
birthday.
reason for him leaving?
He says that we grew apart, but I believe we did, but I think he grew in a different direction. So I think I don't know if it was all too much for him. I'll never know. He never saw a counselor. I saw a counselor. I talk about things. I'm very open. I talk to the people I work
Mm.
with. I talk to everyone. I share things on social media. We did fundraisers at my school for the Stillbirth Foundation and the Bears of Hope, who were really good.
Oh, so
We've
good.
participated in the Bears of Hope walk each year. But he kind of kept everything inside, and I never felt that that was healthy. But as much as I tried to talk to him, I, I I didn't think I thought I would be able to help because I'd gone through it with him, but I don't think I was that person to help him.
Mm.
Um, and I do believe that everything just sort of, it just got the better of us to a degree. And I think then
Excellent.
COVID just didn't help as well because we were finally that family that we envisioned for so many years, but living in this
Mm.
strange world where we couldn't go to the shops, where we couldn't step outside, where we couldn't talk to family or go to social gatherings to vent or just to get a bit of a break from the whole no
Mm.
sleeping and all that sort of stuff. So
It's a
I think
lot.
it was just a lot to handle. But yeah, I definitely don't blame him. I'm in a better place now. Um, but it was very hard. It was trying to navigate my anxiety and be a mum. I remember one time I snapped at my sister because she told me that I had to be stronger for Hallie, and I just couldn't be. And I remember actually going to my GP, and throughout my
Mm.
whole experiences with Milo, with everything, I was so determined to make myself better mentally. And then when all of that happened, with everything that I'd gone through, I just couldn't take it anymore. And I remember going to my GP and I remember crying in his office and I said, I don't want to ask this question. I said, but I need you to give me something because I just can't take it anymore. I said, I'm so upset with myself that, you know, if I can get through the loss of Milo and not need anything, but I can't, it seems silly, um,
Mm.
needing it now. But I think doing it all by myself was just really hard. And I think when Kyle left, I felt like I was losing a piece of Milo. Um, and I was losing that person who
Mm.
understood how it felt inside. Because I think no matter what, even if you've gone through something similar, to somebody else, or you hear someone's story, it's very hard to obviously understand. Like you sympathize and you feel sorry for them, obviously, but it's hard to feel it. And I felt like he had felt the way I did, and so I felt like I held on to him for a really long
Do you
time.
think that even do you think that, like, I know you said earlier how there was so much emphasis on you and the mum that lost the baby, and there wasn't as much help or support for Kyle? Do you think that if he got more support and help, not even from you, but I think just from professionals or people, or do you think that maybe your marriage may have sustained longer or he might have been stronger if there was more support for him?
Yeah, definitely. I think that it definitely would have helped. And like I said, with Milo, knowing whether the help from the hospital would have saved her or not, I'm not sure whether it would have saved our marriage if Kyle got help, but I
Mm,
definitely think it would have given us a fighting chance again. And it just seems so silly,
mm,
him leaving after we just fought so hard. We just fought so hard to
mm,
start to have a family, to get this child here, and then we didn't even get to experience her first
mm,
birthday together, or her first Christmas, or her first
mm,
Easter, or any of those things. I just did up her room,
mm,
and sunflowers hold a big um, place in my heart for Milo, and we put sunflowers all in Hallie's room, and it was Hallie and Milo's room, um, and then
mm.
we had to sell it, and I just remember packing all of it up
Wow.
and selling off Milo's things as well because I didn't have anywhere to keep anything because I didn't have anywhere to live. So we moved
Yeah.
in with my sister,
Mm,
um, and then we moved around a bit, but yeah, it definitely took its toll. And I always tell people out there and on my Facebook and things like that, if I can do these things, that anyone can do anything. um, but
yeah.
yeah, I think loss is such a hard thing to navigate, and I think you don't realize until you've experienced it. A good friend of mine lost her 3-year-old in a drowning accident before I'd
Oof.
even lost Milo, and I was quite close with that little boy. And I remember just not knowing what to say. So sometimes I wouldn't want to talk to her. And I remember after losing Milo, I reached out to her because I had such a different outlook and perspective. And I knew that me saying something was better than me saying nothing at all. And that, we're
Mm,
sad all the time. And just because somebody talks to us
mhm.
about our child that's no longer here and we cry, it doesn't mean that they're reminding us of them or what we've been through. We don't forget, and
No,
they're with us, and they're just
exactly.
opening up a beautiful opportunity for us to talk about them and share their story. And I think what you're doing on here is just amazing because it gives people, whether it be mums, dads, anyone, the opportunity to speak in a
Hmm.
safe environment and to also, get their story across to somebody who may have already or, may unfortunately experience something like this in the future. So, yeah, my biggest thing, and I hope I'm still making Milo proud, is to keep her memory alive and to um, educate people. I think knowledge is power, and not to become complacent and not to be naive. And I remember lots of, even till, you know, up until now, pregnant women sometimes don't want a bar of me or my story, because they're living in this
Mm,
obvious,
hmm.
this positive little bubble, and they just don't want to hear about it because they don't want to think about it, which I don't blame them. You know, when you're pregnant,
Yeah.
you don't want to hear about things that could go
Mm.
wrong. But I also think it's really important to be mindful and just to be aware. I think awareness is also, um, such a strong thing, and it could help save your baby. I definitely think that if I could go back now, it may not have saved Milo's life, but it definitely would have given her a better chance. And I would have been aware, and I would have been knowledgeable, and I would have been assertive. Um, and I just,
I think
yeah,
so too, and I think I know that I've been a bit awkward around pregnant people myself more so recently because like I had a lady who was pregnant ask me the other week, oh, so do you have kids? And prior to that, she had been telling me all of her birth stories about all of her kids, and I guess she didn't feel awkward saying any of that. But yet, when I went to speak about Millie, I felt really awkward and I felt sad and I felt guilty telling this pregnant woman about my story. But it's like, this is reality and this is what can happen, and we'll either take it in or we won't. And
yeah,
I know that subconsciously I've listened to people's stories over the years, and I never ever thought it would be me. But I guess with the podcast, I'm kind of hoping that people will hear things and, maybe advocate for themselves better. Or I know that a lot of midwives have been reaching out to me saying, can I share your podcast? Or, I'm loving listening to this because I do hope that more, I do know that more of them can do better. And I'd been in the hospitals that you were at, not when I was pregnant, but when I'd had undiagnosed endometriosis for years, and I was very much dismissed and I was not listened to. And I just think that there can be medical professionals that will potentially listen to this and we can come through and go, okay, we need to listen
do
more,
better.
we need to
Yeah,
understand more, we need to care more. I just
yeah.
sometimes feel like, yeah, okay, your doctor didn't have time to have lunch that day. Well, okay, you need more staff, or you need, I don't know what all the answers are, and maybe we're, thinking in a bubble of fairy tale land that's not going to happen in the medical world. But what I do know is that since I've moved to the Gold Coast, I've had better experiences. I've had beautiful staff. I've had people that care. I've had people that deal with me with kindness, and so that I
Yeah,
know I know it can be done better. And I
yeah.
really, really hope that, like you said, maybe Milo still might not have survived, but maybe she would have. And I just think that, um, you know,
I think that
I just
that
think things can be done better.
possibility is enough to make any parent or person want answers or want change, I guess. Not even answers, there is no answers. I
Mm-hmm.
tried to get answers by doing the autopsy. I
Mm-hmm.
tried to get answers by seeing that doctor and having that meeting, and I didn't get anywhere. So I think that's when I realized that I can't change anything. Um,
Yeah.
I can't, sorry, change the past, but hopefully, the only thing in my control is, yeah, getting my story out there and making other women,
Mm-hmm.
um, more knowledgeable around pregnancy and just little things to help look out for, like sleeping on your side. So there's sleeping on your side is more safer during pregnancy. And I didn't know that. And I was sleeping on my back sometimes because I thought that was safer. So just all these
Mm-hmm.
sort of, little things that you can do. And I remember also
Amazing.
thinking that in my second pregnancy with Hallie, I remember thinking, if there's anything I can do or whatever's in my control, I'm going to do it to the best of my ability. And I remember telling myself, because I was very anxious, that what happened with Milo would happen again. I just had to tell myself that I'm going to
Mm.
do everything in my power to look after this baby. And then at least at the end of it, I know I've done everything I can and I've asked the questions and I've made
Yeah.
sure I've got that second opinion and I've gone in if I've thought there's no movement and I've taken that drive and as much as, because sometimes too, and I think with Milo, I didn't want to know anything bad. So I might have felt reduced movements but I wasn't
Mm.
sort of on top of it and I didn't think, oh, I thought I'll go to work. So I ended up going back to work after losing Milo part time. I just couldn't go back full time, and I still work part time to this day um, because
Yeah.
I remember just having a child, being a mum was just still so much my priority, and I think when I was pregnant with Milo, sometimes I prioritized the wrong things. Like I went to work 5 days a week, trying to, right up until the end because I thought that that would be best. Um, but maybe it would have been nice to take maternity leave a little bit earlier and still look after the baby inside of me because, um, and I think there is such an
Mm,
emphasis on when you're pregnant, you can't see them, they're inside of you. You kind of just don't really, it just seems different than when they're here in person. But since what I
mm,
experienced with Milo, I looked after Hallie in my stomach as if she was a baby in my arms, and I tried my best and did what
mm,
I felt
absolutely.
I could do. But yeah, I'm definitely lucky to have the family that I have as well. The support that I had it was amazing, and I used to think about the families out there like myself that didn't have that support, and my heart broke for them. Um, but yeah, I'm very
Definitely, and I
grateful
think what
to.
because we had a huge community. We've got an amazing church, a local church, which not everybody is connected in a church. I know you said you're Catholic, but you're not the greatest Catholic. We're very much the same. We're Christians, but we're not overly religious. But
Yes,
we
me
definitely
neither.
believe in God, and I think believing in heaven has been an amazing thing. I think having that vision of them being healed and in heaven, and that we get to go see them. And it's funny that you said that you've been scared to die, because I actually said to my psychologist yesterday, I said, I'm no longer scared of death, because if I die, it means I'm closer to Millie. And that doesn't by any means mean that I'm suicidal, but it
No,
does give me this new sense of like, I actually have less anxiety at the moment, because I'm like, it means I'm just close. Like, I would get to go be with Millie if I was in heaven. So it's given me,
yeah,
yeah,
a
less
different
fear
perspective.
around that. I
Yeah,
don't know if you feel the same, but
no, I definitely
mm,
feel that sometimes. I remember I met a lady and she said, "Oh," and she said it's, and I said to her, I get scared, and she goes, "But it's beautiful, one day you will be with Milo again." And I think I just have to remind
mm,
myself of that. Um, and I definitely feel that Milo's presence is still very much with me, and within her little sister, Hallie. Hallie talks about her a lot. That's been something that's been a little bit hard to navigate
oh, I
because
love that.
trying to tell her about her sister who's in an urn, but then she asks me, where's her legs and her arms and all these other questions that sometimes break my
Mm,
heart, sometimes make me giggle. Um,
yeah.
and sometimes she'll ask me a question and I'll just start crying. Um, but
Mm,
yeah, it's kind of nice. I feel like Hallie's a little bit of Milo's legacy, and that is nice. Um, and that she carries on her
I
name
think
as
they
well.
definitely. Yeah, I love that she carries on her name, and I love that the other day you told me that sunflowers remind you of Milo, and then my friend was literally messaging me that day saying, "Oh, I was just listening to one of your podcasts, and I was drawing, and then she drew the sunflower." And I had just been
Yeah,
texting you, and I thought, what a beautiful sign from Milo.
that was
That Milo was
beautiful.
basically saying, like, "Yay, my mummy's going to be on this podcast," and yeah, I think they definitely send us signs.
They definitely do. I was having a moment actually the other day about Milo, and I text Kyle, and Hallie was with him, and I said that I miss
Mm,
Milo, and I was sitting at the bench, and I had the house to myself, um, and I had that moment to feel and allow myself to feel because most of the time I'm be in the car and I'm driving to work and a song will come on and I have to turn it off and I'll say, "Sorry, Marlo, mummy is on her way to work and I just can't go in
mm,
crying at the moment." So I turn it off. But I was able
yeah.
to feel how I was feeling in that moment. And I love music. So I've got a Google Home in my house and I'm forever just playing music through it randomly. And I was sitting there at the bench and I was missing Milo and I was looking through her photos. And then the song Perfect by Ed Sheeran came on my Google Home and I felt like she
Mm-hmm.
was with me even more and that was really sweet. So
Mm-hmm.
I that made me cry a little bit more again, but um it is nice.
Yeah, I love having a good cry.
It's definitely helpful.
I've loved chatting to you tonight, and I'm fully aware of how long we've been chatting for, and I might even break
Sorry.
the podcast into 2 parts. But I wanted to kind of reiterate. No, I love it. I love it so much, and I have no time limit on any of this because at the end of the day, like we have so much to talk about. But I think the things that I've loved the most, and what I think a lot of people would learn from this episode with you, is the being that there was so much. I think like that you wished you had more time with her, well, like once she was born, that you wish you saw her naked, you wish you took more time to bath her and change her and all those things, because I think they're things that in that moment, because we were the same, we were just like, oh my word, this feels too much. And it's such a hard time to navigate. And I hope that maybe the midwives that listen to this podcast might emphasize it a little bit more, like, because we did end up doing those things. We did change her nappy and we changed her clothes and we bathed her because the midwife really gently guided us through that. And I
Yeah.
think they are learning that, they are so important to a mum and a dad to have those moments.
Yeah.
I think take more photos, hold them for longer, smell them, like take in all of that time as much as you can, because sometimes I lay in bed now and I just imagine Millie on my chest and I can physically feel her there because I took that time to really hold her. And like every time you were speaking, yeah, there was these things that you were saying that you loved and things that you got and things that you did and you didn't. And it's been really beautiful for me to kind of relive that and remember those things as well.
Yeah, it is nice,
I
and
loved that you used heartfelt. We loved our, yeah,
it's nice to hear that you
you
had
go.
those, and that hopefully they've changed things as well. So it is, and I know that our stories are very different as
Mm,
well. But yeah, it is nice to hear that you've got, I guess, those memories, and that the midwife was very encouraging of it. It's something that I hope, yeah, that it's kind of across all hospitals, and that they do encourage that more so now than they did back
mm,
then. It was a long time ago now for me, so hopefully, after hearing that,
mm,
yeah, things have changed a little bit, which is nice to hear. Still very
yeah.
heartbreaking though. Yeah, I have no words.
Mm-hmm. No, you've been so awesome, and it's been like really, really nice just to hear everything. And do you know what I really love is that even 6 years on, you have such a beautiful memory still. Like you literally so vividly remember all these things, and maybe that's not great with trauma, but I think it is because it means you do get to speak of her so honestly and so openly, and it makes me feel like my memories won't, because I sometimes like get sad thinking like, what if I don't remember her, or what if I don't remember the story, or what if I don't remember all the details. But it's so nice to hear you 6 years on still remember all the details.
Yeah. Oh,
It's so
it's
nice.
it's definitely not it's definitely not a crazy thing to think of, because I did too. And I remember, as I started to, I don't want to use the word feel better, but um, as I learned to live with it, that's how I phrase,
Mm,
rephrase everything. Um, you tend to, you don't forget. I don't think you'll ever forget. But I think that with trauma, you kind of push certain parts out of your memory. And
yeah.
just to protect yourself, I guess. And I was watching a movie the other day. I met someone new about a year ago, um, who is lovely, and he's moved into my home, which has been
Yeah.
another experience and something else to get used to. Being in another relationship, but we were watching a show, and something happened in that show. I think it was the longest ride, and I flashed back to being in the hospital, and I was sitting on the hospital bed,
Mm,
and I was just putting my head on my dad's shoulder, and I was just saying it's not fair. And that's what the lady said in the movie, it's not fair. And it just took me back there, and I forgot all about that moment, and it just
mm,
all of a sudden it was in the forefront of my mind, and it made me cry, and I sat there and I cried, to myself very quietly. The tears just rolled and I quickly got them away. Um,
yeah.
but I definitely, yeah, I definitely don't think you'll ever forget. I don't, but it is a worry. And I think with every passing year, you do think to yourself, am I going to forget these little moments or the look of them? And I do find myself looking at her photos just to hold on to that. Um, But yeah, I don't think you'll ever forget. Yeah, or you'll never not remember. Sorry, you definitely will never forget. But yeah, they will be
Mm,
there. They will be somewhere in your mind, and life does go on.
yeah.
It 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 goes on, but they come with you through every step of the way. My new partner
Mm,
now even talks about Milo, who he never met. um,
yeah. I love that.
and Milo's very much a part of our life still, and she always will be, and that's how I'll have it forever.
Yeah.
Um, and so I
Yeah.
think we just take them with us. I literally took Milo in her urn everywhere I went for a long time before I could get used to leaving her. I remember Kyle and I going on a holiday and we put her in the, oh, it's so beautiful.
Oh, yeah. I take my bear everywhere as well.
Oh, it's
That's so cute that you
beautiful.
took the urn on a holiday with you.
We did. We took her with us to a holiday, and then we were so scared to leave her in the room, but we couldn't take her with us to dinner. So we put her in the safe, and then we were like, we don't. Then we told them, and it was just so weird. I never
Oh my
imagined in my
gosh.
lifetime that I would be having conversations like the ones that I have, but it's the new normal. It's the new life for me, I guess. And my family and Carl, and
Yeah.
you'll have so many things that you'll experience along the way, and you'll take Millie with you everywhere, and
Yeah.
I think I wish I could tell you right now that it would all get better. I really do. But as you can see, it doesn't. um,
Yeah.
it's just different. It's a different sad. Um, and
Yeah.
I remember my counselor, she drew a circle and she just drew this black dot. And she said, right now, she said, this is your grief. And she said, you're consumed in it. And then she drew a circle and it was kind of getting a bit further away from the black dot, but it would always come back to the black dot, but it would just get further away. And she said, over time, you'll be over here. She said, some days you'll be back in that black dot. Some days you'll be back over here. And at the time, I couldn't
Yeah.
understand it. I understood it, but I found it very hard to believe. But I believe it now. There's days or
Mm.
weeks where I'm not on top of that black dot. I'm still connected to it. I'm just over the other side, living
Yeah.
and parenting or working or being an auntie or a sister again or a partner. But then a song will come on
How
or a
long did it
scent.
take for that?
It
Like,
took a
was it,
long
and did it,
time.
was it until Hallie came along, or were you, because I'm
Um,
just so scared of that.
yeah,
I
it
feel like like I said to you, I slept most of today, I slept most of yesterday, and it's like, at what point do I stop sleeping my days away? And
Yeah. Oh, I think Kyle and I went through every episode of Friends, The Big Bang Theory, How I Met Your Mother, and all these other shows. We just sat in our house and watched them and slept. And I think I lost half months of my life. Um, it definitely, that first year is definitely hard. Uh, you're experiencing all your first Christmas without them. And Christmas is my favorite time of the year because everyone's celebrating together and everyone's on usually on holidays and the family get together. So that was definitely something that I struggled with terribly. I had so many ornaments made up for Milo, and I had a chair made up for
oh,
Milo because I saw a saying about we'll keep a chair spare for them who aren't here.
oh yeah,
Um, yeah. Um, and so I just made up my own little tradition that would incorporate Milo into my family, to make me feel like she was here. But there would be times where my nieces and nephews would run around, and I think it was Easter, and they were all playing, and I sat at the table and I broke down. And then you feel guilty because you feel like you're ruining everyone's fun. um, so it's kind of a tug of war. You kind of, and I feel like sometimes I'll cry and I'll continue to
yeah,
cry, and sometimes I'll cry and I'll stop myself. Um, but yeah, it definitely that first year is hard, and then I think once you get past that first year, you realize that you can survive it. You might not enjoy it, which is
yeah,
awful to say, and I'd love to tell you that you would enjoy it. One day you will. I enjoyed my last Christmas and with
oh,
Hallie, um, but life is just forever different. There's just always that. I remember my life before Milo, it was full, and now it's not full because there's a piece missing. And
yeah,
Hallie is my little rainbow baby because they say that after, um, I can't remember the saying off the top of my head, but after a miscarriage or stillborn or baby loss, they refer to the baby as a rainbow baby. And I wrote a post for Hallie's birthday. I think it was her second birthday. And and I wrote on there, um, "Thank you for making my life forever colourful, my little rainbow." And she definitely has brought the colour back into my life. And I think over time,
That's lovely.
slowly, the colour did come back into the world again. And it's so weird. And I know obviously the colour didn't drain, but I swear to you, it was a shade of grey and dark. And then with the months and the years, it slowly come back. Never the same, but it did come back.
Mm,
And Hallie brings me so much joy. But then at the same time, I look at her and I think how you'd be with your sister. And she asks me questions like, "Is Milo coming back
mm,
from heaven?" And I have to tell her no. And then she
mm,
asks why Milo's in heaven. She asks how Milo got to heaven. She asks
mm,
if we're going to go to heaven and what day.
mm,
Um, and so that's
mm,
really hard.
mm,
Um, but sometimes she'll say beautiful little things that do make me laugh. And I know Milo would have laughed with me up there.
mm,
And my
mm,
parents still, when they count their grandchildren or tell people how many grandchildren they have, Milo's very much counted in that. Um,
I love that.
and yeah, and which is really nice. And I think that the biggest gift that anybody can give a grieving parent or person, we lose all kinds of people in our life, um, is just to say their name and to remember them and to not pretend that they didn't
Mm,
exist. I think it's an injustice to that little
mm,
person who is very much here, who, your, the title of your podcast, Little Life, Big Loss, says it all. Couldn't think of
mm,
anything better for you to call it, to be honest, because it was a little life and it was brief, but the loss is huge and it's never ending, and it's something that will last forever.
mm,
I'm going to miss Milo to the day I die. And I've told everyone when I do die, they're cremating me and they're putting me back with Milo because I want to be whole again for
mm,
eternity. And at the moment, I'm not whole
mm,
because I'm missing her.
mm,
And she was a part of me. And I want us to be together forever. So, whenever the day comes that I do
mm,
pass away, I want to be put back together again, and that means that Milo and I will be
mm.
back together. Um, I also heard someone say
Oh
that
my word.
losing them was
So
like
nice.
leaving the hospital with no arm, or no leg, and you've got to learn how to live without
Mm,
that part of you. Um, and you do, but yeah, it's never the same. It might look the same to other people from the outside, or they see you laughing. I remember the first time I laughed, I felt so guilty. I think I laughed and then I started to cry because I just thought, why, what am I doing? How could I possibly be laughing right now or enjoying myself?
we I want to find what it's called because I found it the other week, but we also it's called oscillation theory because when we lost Millie, we my sister Dylan, my husband, and I were sitting at home and we were either in a state of crying so much or laughing hysterically, and we were laughing at like stupid things. We were like, this is not even funny, but we were crying with laughter. And then I was listening to a podcast the other week, and they were talking about this. It's called dual process model of bereavement, and it's basically where your body gives you a break of the intense sadness. And so
Yeah.
it's where it's almost like fight or flight. It's like your body's trying to, okay, I can't deal with any more sadness right now. I'm just going to cry hysterically to give myself the break and
Relief.
grief
Yeah.
and yeah, this relief for just 1 second. And
That
it's so
makes a lot
true.
of
We
sense.
had some really strange weeks of just yeah.
Yeah. I it's funny
But
you say that.
we loved it because we were like we had to laugh. Yeah.
To feel like human again or to feel some sort of normality. It's nice to hear that though, and it sounds like it's,
Mm,
your sister's quite close with you, which is lovely. I think you definitely need that support. Um, and that whole laughing and crying thing. I remember um, doing during IVF. I think I found out that the second cycle had not worked, and I was just feeling so emotional. And I went back home and I put on Afterlife by Ricky Gervais. I got told it was good. And I
oh yeah.
simultaneously laughed and cried at the same time. And I remember saying, I don't know what's happening to my body right now, but I'm feeling laughter but sadness and yeah, it was a very weird experience.
Yeah.
um, but that makes a lot of sense.
So it's called oscillation theory.
Oscillation
Mm,
theory. I'm going to have to look into that.
mm. Yes, it was very interesting. So I have absolutely loved chatting with you tonight. And
Thank
it's so
you.
funny because I had so many questions, written out, but I didn't even need to ask them because I just feel like you covered everything so beautifully, and you talked about, the best advice to give somebody who's grieving, and the best thing to do for somebody. The fact that you talked about the professional help that you got, the professional help that your husband didn't get, and the effects of all of those things, COVID, the probably the lack of support from the hospital, and then the beautiful midwife and the way she did support you and the difference in that. So I just think you've covered everything so beautifully, and I think Milo would be and is so proud of you, and you really are doing her proud. And I know people say that about me a million. Sometimes we don't believe it, but I do think that Milo is absolutely so stoked with everything you're doing for her
Thank
and
you.
around her, and I love that you're still crying this far on, because I just love crying, and I love
Yes.
knowing that they're here. So I think it's been a really beautiful honor of her tonight.
Thank you very much. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak about her and share my story. Hopefully, it helps someone, even one person.
I'm sure it will. No, it absolutely will. I know that it will, and I just know that the way that you spoke with her in so much grace, and you still spoke about the hospital with so much grace as well, even with everything that could have been done differently. So yeah, I have no
Thank
doubt we're going
you.
to stay in contact, because I have 1,000 more questions to ask, and I know that I'm going to need your help when I start IVF in the next couple of months, and I'm going to need you to
Oh,
hold my
yes.
hand. So please do
Oh,
so.
definitely. I would love to. It would be my honor. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I will be uploading the podcast this Sunday, and you'll be able
Awesome.
to go back and watch it and listen. And yeah, I look forward to it. And I'm sure that in that time, people might even reach out to you as well.
Yep.
And if they want to reach out to you, are you okay with that?
I sure am. Yes, definitely. Happy to help. Or listen. Sometimes that is all the
Awesome.
help someone might
Awesome.
need.
Thanks so much. And there was one other thing I was thinking of as well. There is a friend of mine on the Central Coast that actually runs sessions for lost mums. I'm not sure, and dads as well. I assume so. So I'm going to connect you guys, and
Yeah,
then I'm going to chat
please
with
do.
her. And if it's okay, I might put something in the show notes about that event on the Central Coast. So
Yep, that sounds great. Thank you.
amazing. Awesome, my lovely. Well, I will chat to you soon. And thank you again so much. I do not take for granted having you on here.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been my pleasure.
Thanks, Ash.
See you, Rochelle.
Bye.
See ya.